New Year's Eve turned into a nightmare. According to statistics, the nature of a crime largely depends on the time of day it is committed. For example, during the day, economic crimes, robberies, thefts, frauds, etc. are more common. In the evening, domestic violence incidents occur more frequently. But at night, when the streets are dark and nearly deserted, and it's hard to spot a criminal, the time comes for crime and the most brutal acts of evil. Everyone knows that walking alone on city streets at night is unsafe, especially for women. However, sometimes circumstances make it unavoidable. The story of a young British woman named Rachel Moran began this way. On New Year's Eve, she needed to return home from her parents' place where she had been visiting. The distance was only about 1 mile along a route she walked daily, yet this time, Rachel never made it home, disappearing about 150 feet from her destination. She was searched for a whole month, with hopes that the missing girl might still be alive, but the truth that eventually emerged shocked all of Ireland. Who was Rachel Moran? Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in Englishcall on the island of Ireland. She was the youngest of 4 children in the family of Wanda and Ray Moran. She grew up with 2 older sisters and a brother with whom she was always very close. From a young age, Rachel absolutely loved dancing. Her parents, noticing this passion, enrolled her in a ballet studio, which she attended for many years. She even planned to connect her future with this field, either as a ballerina or a choreographer. However, as she grew older, her views and preferences began to change. Rachel was an excellent student, gravitating toward the exact sciences, and after finishing school, she entered a prestigious college to study management information systems. After studying for about 2 years, Rachel realized she had made a mistake in choosing her profession. As her creative nature took over, she decided to return to choreography and pursue higher education part-time. During this period, she met a young man named Mark, who was only a year older than her. They quickly bonded, forming a friendship that soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. About 6 months after they met, the couple decided to live together and rented a small apartment in a new cozy residential complex located just 1 mile from Rachel's parents' house, so she visited them almost every day. In the fall of 2002, Rachel started working at a local bakery, where she specialized in decorating confectionery. She fell in love with this work and seriously considered getting a second degree in culinary arts. It's worth noting that Rachel always cooked well, and it was one of her hobbies. Also, in 2002, Mark and Rachel adopted 2 cats from a local animal shelter, whom they adored and treated almost like children. The young couple tried not to leave the pets alone at home for long, fed them on schedule, and cared for them in every possible way. A New Year's Eve argument. As the celebration of the New Year 2003 approached, everyone around was busy preparing for the festivities, buying gifts for their loved ones, and choosing recipes for the holiday table. Rachel had a lot of orders at work, and she was doing her best to keep up. For the holidays, she and Mark planned to visit both their parents, but wanted to do so without leaving their cats alone at home all night, especially since one of the pets was unwell and needed special care. The couple had previously agreed on how and where they would celebrate the new year. They intended to spend some time together at home first. Then Mark planned to visit his parents, but after midnight, he was supposed to return to the apartment he shared with Rachel. Rachel, meanwhile, arranged to meet her brother at a bar, but wanted to stop by her parents' house before midnight and stay there until morning. The first part of the evening went according to plan. The couple had a romantic dinner at home, drank a glass of champagne, after which Mark left to visit his parents, and Rachel's brother picked her up. Rachel spent time with her brother at the bar until around 11 p.m., after which they went together to her parents' home, where they were greeted by her father, mother, and sister, who were waiting for them at the festive table. Around 1 a.m., Rachel called her boyfriend on their home phone, but he didn't answer. After a few more unsuccessful attempts, she dialed his mobile number. When Mark answered, she asked where he was and if he had returned home, as they had agreed. Mark admitted that a close friend had invited him to a party, and he simply couldn't say no. Rachel was furious, as they had discussed that someone should be at home at night to look after the animals, one of which was not feeling well, and they agreed not to leave them alone until morning. After a brief verbal altercation, Mark said he would return by 6 a.m., insisting that nothing serious would happen in those few hours. But Rachel was beside herself with anger, insisting that someone had to stay with the animals. However, her boyfriend stood his ground, and the conversation ended in a heated argument. Upset and angry, Rachel began preparing to leave for home, even though it was already well past midnight, and walking alone on the street seemed unsafe. Her mother, hearing her daughter arguing on the phone with her boyfriend and realizing that she was planning to leave, tried to talk her out of it. Wanda urged her daughter to wait until morning, assuring her that nothing bad would happen to the animals in such a short period. But Rachel was adamant and was already getting dressed. Her mother was very worried about her and didn't want to let her go. They started arguing loudly and continued even when Rachel was already standing at the open door. Nevertheless, her mother could not convince her. By that time, Rachel's father and brother were already quite drunk and had gone to bed, so no one could accompany her. Around 1:30 a.m., she left her parents' house, and no one ever saw her alive again, vanished into the darkness. Rachel promised her mother that she would call as soon as she got home. The journey should have taken no more than 15 minutes, but an hour and a half passed, and her daughter still hadn't called. The worried mother began calling her, but no one answered either the home or mobile numbers. Near dawn, Mrs. Moran finally fell asleep on the living room couch with the phone in her hand. She woke up around 9:30 a.m. on January 1st and heard her husband talking to someone on the phone. The word daughter was mentioned, so she assumed he was speaking to Rachel. However, as soon as he hung up, he said it was their eldest daughter who had been trying to reach her sister all morning and was starting to worry. After hearing this, panic gripped the mother. She tried to call Rachel again, but her mobile was off, and when she called the home phone, a sleepy Mark answered, not understanding what was happening. It turned out that when Mark returned home after the party at 7 a.m. and didn't find his girlfriend there, he assumed she had stayed with her parents and simply went to bed. Mark was very surprised when he learned that Rachel had set out for their apartment during the night, but never arrived. He had no idea where she could be, but he was certain she hadn't been home, as she would have fed the animals first. However, the bowls were empty, and the cats were clearly hungry. The bed in their bedroom was made, and there was no sign that anyone had entered the apartment after they had left it together the previous evening. Rachel's parents, as well as her boyfriend, began calling all their friends, close ones and acquaintances, asking if they had seen Rachel or had any contact with her. But all efforts were in vain. The Moran family reported her missing to the police that same day, and despite Rachel being 21 years old, the authorities did not wait the usual 24 hours before launching an immediate search. The police inspected Rachel's apartment, as well as her parents' home where she was last seen, and spoke with all the relatives, friends, and Mark, completely ruling out the possibility that she had run away on her own. It should be added that the missing woman had a striking and attractive appearance. She was tall, slim, with beautiful facial features and long platinum blonde hair. Seeing someone like her on the street, passers-by would undoubtedly remember her, so detectives began searching for possible witnesses. Stranger in the dark. In 2002, tracking a location by a mobile signal was not yet possible, and call and message logs from the girl's phone provided no leads. All that could be determined was that the device was turned off approximately 15 minutes after Rachel left her parents' house, and judging by the time, she should have been near her own home by then. During another conversation with law enforcement, Rachel's mother suddenly recalled an important detail she hadn't mentioned earlier. It turns out that as her daughter was already outside, they continued arguing loudly at the door. Wanda didn't want to let her go, urging her to wait until morning, and at that moment, she noticed a man walking down the street, past their house. The woman even thought about asking him to accompany Rachel home, but she didn't. Wanda couldn't get a clear look at the stranger in the dim light. she only saw a silhouette in a dark jacket and hat, so she couldn't even give a rough description. However, this person could be a valuable witness or a criminal. He needed to be found as soon as possible, so the authorities asked all local residents as well as shop owners to provide any surveillance camera footage if they had any. Detectives managed to establish that the unknown man walked past a store located about 400 feet from Rachel's parents' house, and about a minute later, the missing girl also walked past the same store. The man's face or any other identifying features couldn't be made out due to the poor quality of the recording, but it became clear that Rachel had covered about half of her route home. The search continued, and the detectives decided to use a tactic that often helped in missing person investigations. They found a girl who closely resembled Rachel, dressed her in clothing identical to what Rachel was wearing on the night she disappeared, and asked her to walk the same route at night. All of this was filmed, and then the footage of the blonde walking down the street at night was shown on the news, with a request for anyone who had seen her on New Year's Eve to come forward. The plan worked, and several people reported seeing a lone girl walking, as well as a dark male silhouette. However, one witness who was smoking on a balcony saw the man pass by first, followed by the blonde. Another witness, living near the residential complex where Rachel's apartment was, claimed that the girl passed by first, followed a few feet behind by the man. This suggested that the stranger either fell behind or that it was a different person altogether. 10 days into the search, another camera was discovered along the girl's route, located about 150 feet from her home. The footage showed Rachel walking by, followed closely by a man. There was little doubt that it was the same man, as he had a similar build and was wearing identical clothing. It appeared that at some point, the man let the girl walk ahead of him and then began following her. Disturbing clues. The large-scale search for the missing girl began within the first few days of her disappearance. Detectives marked a 10-mile search radius and involved helicopters, divers, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. They combed through streets, wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water. The search was conducted on the ground and from the air, with small streams and artificial canals being drained for thorough inspection. But time passed, and there were no results. Since her disappearance, Rachel hadn't used her mobile phone or made any transactions with her bank card, leading authorities to suspect that she was likely no longer alive. However, her relatives held out hope of finding her alive and well. 2 weeks later, a sneaker was found in a drainage ditch near Rachel's home, which her family recognized. According to her mother, Rachel was wearing that pair of shoes on the day she disappeared. A few days later, in one of the drained streams, officers found a black handbag containing a mobile phone, a makeup bag, a wallet with bank cards, and an ID card in the name of Rachel Moran. All the evidence was found within a mile of Rachel's home, leading the police to theorize that the possible criminal might live nearby. If this theory was correct, then he likely also hid the body in this area. This led to the development of a plan to conduct a door-to-door search of all residents within a 2-mile radius of Rachel's home. Naturally, this required significant time and resources, so more officers were brought in, each working with a partner to minimize risks. Grim discovery in the trash chute. Nearly a month had passed since the young woman disappeared. The door-to-door search of neighborhood residents was progressing slowly, as it was difficult to find homeowners at home. And on top of that, the police needed permission to enter the premises, which also took time. On January 28th, on Nash Court, a police officer and his assistant entered another house and were immediately met with a foul odor. The homeowner, a 23-year-old named Michael Little, assured them that there was nothing to worry about, claiming that the plumbing was clogged and he was waiting for a plumber. Visiting him at the time was his friend, Marcus, who didn't understand what the police were searching for and merely observed their actions. Nothing suspicious was found in the house, but the nauseating smell persisted, raising the officers' suspicions. The source of the odor turned out to be not the bathroom, but a narrow trash chute, which was clogged with bags of various debris. The officers decided to take a closer look at its contents, and after removing several bags, they discovered a human leg sticking out. The police immediately called for backup and arrested both the homeowner and his guest. Michael remained completely calm and even detached throughout the process, while his friend had a full-blown breakdown upon seeing the deceased girl. The body was extracted from the narrow trash chute with great difficulty, and it was unclear how it had been placed there at all. The victim was almost completely unclothed, and due to the advanced state of decomposition, determining the cause of death immediately was impossible. However, numerous stab wounds were clearly visible on the corpse. The suspect's story. Little immediately claimed that he was relieved the body had been found, as the smell had been driving him crazy. He also shared his version of events from that fateful night, but it sounded highly unconvincing. According to him, while walking down the street, he overheard the argument between the mother and daughter, from which he gathered that the girl was planning to go somewhere alone. He followed her, struck up a conversation, and they became acquainted. When they reached Michael's house, he allegedly invited her in, and Rachel agreed. According to Little, they drank a little, chatted, and then engaged in intimate relations by mutual consent, after which he fell asleep. The suspect claimed that he woke up around 5 in the morning and saw the girl in the kitchen acting irrationally. On the table lay a small bag of prohibited substances belonging to him, and he assumed that his guest had tried something from it. Then, according to him, she grabbed a knife and attacked him, but he managed to knock the weapon out of her hands and delivered several blows that turned out to be fatal. Michael attributed the entire incident to an unfortunate accident in the process of self-defense. Naturally, everyone who knew the deceased girl disagreed with this version. First of all, Rachel would never have spoken to a stranger on a deserted street at night, let alone gone anywhere with him. Secondly, she would never have cheated on her boyfriend. And thirdly, she had never used any prohibited substances in her life. The autopsy revealed that the girl had been subjected to intimate violence, as evidenced by the characteristic internal injuries, and traces of Little's seminal fluid were found inside her. Moreover, the victim's body had 27 stab wounds, which did not look like self-defense, and a third of them were inflicted from behind. Who is Michael Little? After the suspect's arrest, law enforcement reviewed his background and discovered that this young man already had an extensive criminal record. He grew up in a troubled family and had been caught stealing multiple times while still in school. Incidentally, he never finished school, and as a result, due to the lack of basic education, he couldn't find even a somewhat decent job, lived on benefits, and also on what he obtained illegally. He had been arrested several times for possession and distribution of prohibited substances. Acquaintances described Little as a pathological liar. He constantly boasted about his intimate exploits and the impressive number of lovers, though in reality, all the girls tried to avoid this strange and aggressive guy. Recently, however, Michael had been increasingly telling stories about a tall blonde he was allegedly dating, though no one had ever seen her with him. Law enforcement speculated that the suspect might have previously seen the victim since they lived in the same neighborhood, with their homes just a few hundred feet apart. It's likely that he developed an interest in the girl and began fantasizing, telling his friends about her. On that fateful night, seeing her alone on the street, the criminal decided to seize the opportunity and attack her. However, the victim and her assailant had not been acquainted before. A new, even stranger version. As the investigation continued, the suspect unexpectedly retracted his initial statements and presented an entirely different version, claiming that his friend Marcus, who was arrested along with him, was the real criminal. Allegedly, Marcus was the one who met the girl on the street that night and brought her to his house. They drank together, and then the guest began showing interest in the homeowner, leading them to retreat to his bedroom. After the intimate encounter, according to the accused, an enraged Marcus burst into the room, furious that Rachel had chosen someone else over him. He attacked the girl with a knife, ending her life, and then threatened Michael with violence, demanding that he help hide the body and remain silent about what had happened. Naturally, no one believed this story, although the accused and his lawyer insisted that this was exactly how things had unfolded. However, no evidence linked Marcus to the crime. He had an alibi for New Year's Eve, and his reaction when the body was discovered indicated that he had no idea about the nightmare that had occurred in his friend's house. Trial and sentence. Michael never admitted his guilt, so the exact sequence of events from that fateful night could only be partially reconstructed. It was determined that on December 31st, 2002, Little attended a party and was preparing to celebrate the new year with friends. At the party, he tried to flirt with one girl but was rudely rejected, and then with another but with the same result. Angry and intoxicated, Michael left the event and headed home, where he happened to cross paths with Rachel, upon whom he unleashed all his pent-up rage. He overheard the girl arguing with her mother and decided to follow her. At some point, the criminal turned off the road into a dark alley and waited for his victim to pass by, then followed her. As they walked past Michael's house, he attacked Rachel, stabbing her several times in the back. It's likely that he then dragged the unfortunate girl into his home, where he took advantage of her, then finished her off with the same knife and hid her body in the trash chute. In October 2003, Little was found guilty of assaulting and taking the life of Rachel Moran. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole only after 35 years.
The case of Luc Maria Lopez, from love to violent crime. The crime rate in Guatemala is extremely high. According to statistics, at least 100 crimes are committed here per week, half of which are so-called domestic crimes, and almost 70% of serious crimes remain unsolved. According to The New Yorker, fewer civilians died in the Iraq war zone in 2009 than in Guatemala. It was in this beautiful but dangerous country that the tragic events that will be discussed today took place. The story of an attractive young woman named Luc Maria Lopez started out romantic and promising, but ended up as a handful of ashes in a bag thrown down a sewer manhole. She was victimized by a domestic tyrant whom she herself spent years forgiving over and over again, giving him a chance to mend his ways. There was a lot of controversy in this case, and the perpetrator could have avoided responsibility, but let's go over everything in order. Who is Luc Maria Lopez? The full name of our today's heroine, given to her at birth, sounds like Luc Maria del Rocio Morales Lopez. She was born in 1995, March 17th, in the small town of San Cristobal Verapaz, in a simple and rather modest family of Ada Morales and Brian Lopez. Luc Maria was the youngest of 2 children of her parents and was raised with her older brother Omar. As an infant, the girl nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction. To save her life, a complex operation was performed, and doctors gave no guarantees. But the baby's mother prayed for her recovery and believed that her daughter would recover. So soon it happened, and the surgery itself at such an early age, fortunately did not affect the development of the girl. During her school years, Luc Maria was actively engaged in sports, in particular, attended sections of gymnastics and athletics, and was also fond of classical choreography. She was a creative person, easily found a common language with different people and quickly made friends. The girl also studied well and had an aptitude for the humanities. After graduating from school, Luc Maria thought about getting a higher education and decided to enter a prestigious state university. She chose law and later decided to specialize in criminalistics because this direction has always aroused her genuine interest. A fateful encounter. When Luc Maria was a student, she and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was her older brother's 25th birthday that year, and her parents and sister wanted to give him a special gift, a motorcycle, which he had long dreamed of. In the showroom, they were met by a polite and very attentive young consultant who introduced himself as Jorge. He showed the buyers the whole assortment and gave some recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model, but decided to think more and consult with the head of the family. Leaving, they took a business card of the car dealership, and also Luc Maria left her phone number for feedback. Soon the girl received a call from Jorge, the same consultant from the salon, but the conversation was not about the upcoming purchase, but was more of a personal nature. After that, Jorge dialed Luc Maria's number several more times before he dared to ask her out to a coffee shop. It was obvious that he liked the beautiful, sultry brunette very much, but he did not know where to begin the acquaintance. It should be noted that Luc Maria also liked this handsome young man, so on his proposal to meet, she responded with consent. The guy was a year younger than her, but such a small difference in age was not an obstacle for them. Almost immediately, a romantic relationship began between them, which developed rapidly. Both felt that it was true love at first sight, and believed that a long and happy life was ahead of them. After only a few months, the couple decided to live together, and although their parents did not approve of such a rush, the young people were soon married. About 6 months later, the lovers played a wedding, inviting only the closest people to the celebration. Curiously, the problems began on the day of the wedding, when the institution where the banquet was to be held, there was a hitch because of which the holiday was almost derailed. The couple had to overpay a considerable amount of money so that the wedding, after all, took place at the appointed time. Who is Jorge? About who was the chosen one of Luc Maria, there is very little information in the public domain. It is known that he was born in 1996 in the town of Santa Catalina La Tinta, which is in the central part of Guatemala. Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons and was raised with his brother Pablo. His family balanced on the brink of poverty, so that the boys as children were not spoiled with beautiful clothes and expensive toys, because the money was enough only for the bare necessities. But Jorge somehow did not aspire to a better life, so he did not bother to study and look for a decent job. The young man, as they say, just went with the flow. People who knew Jorge personally spoke about him as a withdrawn, uncommunicative, and sometimes aggressive guy. He really had problems with controlling emotions, because of which Jorge did not have many friends and poorly formed relationships with the opposite sex. Nevertheless, when he met the girl of his dreams, he made every effort to win her love, and then he was in a hurry to get married, fearing that she might change her mind. By the way, the parents of Luc Maria from the very beginning treated her son-in-law with suspicion. There was something about this young man they definitely did not like, but they could not say what it was and could not dissuade their daughter from marrying him. An unhappy marriage. Soon after the wedding, the young wife became pregnant, but since she had not yet managed to get a university degree, she could not find a good job. No one wanted to take a girl with no experience who was in an interesting position, so she had to make do with casual labor. Her husband by that time had lost his job, but was in no hurry to burden himself with a new occupation. When the couple had a daughter, who was named Alice, with money in the family was quite tight. Both spouses were unemployed. They had no money, not only to pay for rented housing, but even to buy food and the most basic things needed in the household. Then Jorge convinced his wife that the only way out for them would be to temporarily move to live in his parents' house. Luc Maria refused for a long time, but since they had no choice, and they could not stay on the street with a baby in their arms, the young woman eventually agreed. Ada knew about the problems in her daughter's family, and repeatedly persuaded her to return to her native home, but she persisted in saying that everything would soon get better with her husband, and there was no reason to worry. One day the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter, but coming to the house of her son-in-law's parents, found there a frightening picture. Luc Maria was in a deplorable state. She ate only once a day and then a little. Jorge's family did not think it necessary to feed their unemployed daughter-in-law. Luc Maria was breastfeeding her young daughter, so malnutrition could affect not only her health, but also the health of the child. However, the meager food was only a small part of all the troubles and problems Luc Maria faced in her mother-in-law's home. As it turned out, there she was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. This guy was annoyed by the crying of the child, as well as the presence of children's things in the house, so much so that he repeatedly threw them at Luc Maria, and once again launched a baby bottle at her and hit little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge saw all this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, and acted as if they were strangers to him. Ada convinced her daughter to take her granddaughter and return to her parents' house, but soon Jorge appeared on their doorstep, asking his wife to return and promising to get a job. She agreed. but only after the young people were able to rent an apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. When Luz Maria defended her diploma, she was able to fulfill her long-time dream and got a job in the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and very responsible young woman, she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and gradually began to move up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably, so much so that the couple could afford to buy a car for two. However, this was solely the merit of the wife, who worked hard, spared no expense, and was well regarded by her superiors. Jorge was still in search of himself and preferred to live at the expense of his wife, jealous, lazy, and a domestic tyrant. The young husband had an explosive temper, and the situation only worsened with time. He did not want to work, interrupted by temporary part-time jobs, and even then, not often. He preferred to sit at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends and spending what his wife earned. In addition, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not allow her to make friends, to have lunch with colleagues in cafes, or just to be somewhere without him. He constantly checked her phone, looked at the history of calls and read messages, and also forbade her to register accounts in social networks. At home, when left alone, the husband behaved no better. He made scandals in the middle of nowhere, constantly clarified relations, and always blamed his wife for all the problems and family troubles. When they lived in the house of his parents, Jorge never stood up for his wife and just watched how she humiliated, insulted, and sometimes even beat his relatives. Jorge himself also occasionally gave the will of his fists and did not see anything wrong in it. He treated Luz Maria as his property, believing that she would endure everything and would not go anywhere from him. Neighbors often heard the screams coming from the house of the couple, as well as saw on the face and body of the young woman signs of beatings. Repeatedly, Lopez tried to leave her husband and wanted to file for divorce. She several times took her daughter and moved out of the rented apartment in the house of her parents, but her husband every time came there and literally on his knees begged her forgiveness. And each time Luz Maria forgave him, giving him another chance, even though her parents asked her to come to her senses and leave this abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another fight with manhandling, Luz Maria took 3-year-old Alice, got into the car, and came to her mother in tears. A day later, Jorge arrived there, and it was unclear whether he wanted his wife or the car back. He said that he had found a job, and now their lives would change, and he also swore that he would never raise a hand on his wife again in his life. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him again and went with her husband to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain that her husband had not only failed to get a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she had earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Ada felt sorry for her daughter and said she would give her some money so that she and her granddaughter would have enough for everything they needed until her daughter received her salary. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the appointed time. Moreover, she did not answer phone calls and messages, which was unusual for her. Concerned, Ada decided to go to her daughter's workplace the next day, but there she learned that Luz Maria had not shown up for the second day and that no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, who was also looking for his wife, arrived at the prosecutor's office. According to him, they had once again quarreled, and he thought that Luz Maria had gone to her mother's house and was not answering her calls because she was offended by him. Ada immediately sensed something wrong and assumed that her son-in-law was lying, so she went straight to the police so that the search for Luz Maria could begin as soon as possible. That same day, an alert system was announced nationwide under the code name Isabel Claudina, in the original Alerta Isabel Claudina. This meant an emergency search for a young woman reported missing. When the massive search began, the missing woman's husband was the first person to be named as a suspect, although it would be more accurate to say that he was the only suspect in the case. Luz Maria had no enemies. There was no reason to believe that she had been kidnapped, and the last person who saw her alive was Jorge.
Naturally, this guy denied his involvement in the case, claiming that he himself was knocked down in search of his wife, and now extremely indignant and annoyed by the fact that he became the main suspect. At the same time, he himself was constantly confused in his testimony and could not clearly explain why he did not inform the police about the disappearance on the day of his wife's disappearance. And if he thought that she was at his mother-in-law's house, why he did not call or go there. While the police were searching for witnesses and combing the area, the body of the missing Luc Maria was accidentally discovered by municipal workers. On January 22nd, several workers arrived to a call about a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they saw a strange large plastic bag with something black in it. As they looked closer, they realized that what they were looking at were charred human remains. They immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and the police officers who arrived suggested that the body found could be that of Luc Maria Lopez, who is wanted all over the country. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to a young woman and her parents and brother at the identification, despite the fact that the body was badly disfigured by fire, confirmed with certainty that it was her. It is noteworthy that the package was found on the same street where the building of the prosecutor's office, where the deceased worked, was located, except that there were no surveillance cameras as well as lighting in that place. Despite the fact that the body was badly burned, pathologists were able to establish that the woman was severely beaten and the cause of her death was asphyxia. This was evidenced by internal hemorrhages, several fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of caked blood in her nose and mouth. There were deep marks on her neck indicating strangulation. It's a strange message. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged in the case, and the victim's parents had no doubt that it was the son-in-law who had so brutally murdered their daughter. Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and the motive for his heinous act was being investigated. Also, psychologists-criminalists had to analyze in detail this marriage and the relationships formed within the family. At the investigation, Ada Lopez provided a frightening audio recording, which was sent to her anonymously by someone who lived in the neighborhood with her daughter and son-in-law. Apparently, this person has repeatedly witnessed the family scandals of the couple, and this time decided to record their quarrel, not suspecting that everything will end in a brutal murder. The audio recording clearly shows Luc Maria desperately screaming and crying for help, while in the background little Alice sobs in the background. Ada was horrified by what she heard. She stated that if that witness had called the police right away, her daughter might be alive right now. The man who made the recording not only did not call the police, but did not even visit the house from which the horrible screams were coming. The police also failed to trace the anonymous person, so it was not possible to involve him in the investigation as a witness. The audio recording was attached to the materials of the criminal case, and Ada gave a big interview, during which she called on all citizens to be vigilant and report to the police about the revealed facts of domestic violence, and not just to film them on camera or record them on a dictaphone. According to the woman, such simple actions will help save someone's life. This high-profile crime caused a widespread public outcry, and thousands of people took to the streets, staging rallies across the country to demand that the killer be punished. Although Jorge was taken into custody almost immediately, he continued to deny his guilt, saying that he personally drove his wife to work that fateful day, after which she disappeared. Street CCTV footage did indeed show the couple's car traveling in the direction of Luc Maria's workplace that morning. However, due to the tinted windows, it could not be clearly established how many people were in the car. Also, none of the recordings showed the car stopping and Luc Maria getting out of the cabin. The next curious discovery was made at the couple's rented home, where numerous washed-out traces of blood and drag marks were found. This suggested that this was where the brutal crime had taken place. Suspicions were confirmed when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were found in the trunk of the family car. In addition, during the search, the investigator was interested in the recent purchase made by the couple, namely, a double orthopedic mattress. More precisely, not even the mattress itself, but the dense polyethylene in which it was wrapped. As the comparative analysis showed, it was in it that Jorge had packed the burnt remains of his wife. It was also possible to find several witnesses from among the neighbors of the family who repeatedly heard Jorge insulting his wife and threatening her with death. A few days before Luc Maria's sudden disappearance, her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. The picture of the crime. Based on the data that managed to collect expert criminologists, as well as relying on the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation of the pieces restored the gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021, the day before the spouses had a big fight, and Jorge again gave the will of his fists. He had problems with controlling outbursts of anger before, but this time he simply went into a rage. He hit his wife several times, causing her to scream and cry for help. It was these screams that the neighbors of the family heard, but did not call the police. In the process of beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and also caused her a head injury. After that, he strangled her with his bare hands and then attempted to dispose of the corpse. To do so, he dragged the body out into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not expect his funeral pyre to be so smoky and the stench of burning meat and hair to eat away at his eyes. He was afraid that the neighbors would notice it, suspect something wrong, and call the fire department or the police. So he quickly put out the fire, wrapped the burnt remains in plastic, and then went to find a secluded place where he thought the body would never be found. The most horrible thing was that Jorge committed all these atrocities in front of their young daughter, who, due to her age, although not fully, but understood what was happening. The child, who was 3.5 years old at the time, saw the beating and the crime, as evidenced by the child's cries and screams, which were also caught on tape. Jorge, who had some knowledge of forensics thanks to his wife's textbooks, which were in abundance in their home, tried to cover up the crime and establish an alibi. He found a stretch of road where there were no lights or video cameras and dumped his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, going unnoticed. The next morning, he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had driven Luc Maria there, as he did every morning, and the next day he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. Trial and verdict. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could, and also tried to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, and there was not a single piece of evidence that would unequivocally prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest, and also argued that Jorge himself was deeply depressed by the fact that he was accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, the decisive evidence was the data obtained from Luc Maria's phone. All this time, the gadget was in her husband's possession, and on the first day after the crime, he sent from it several messages to different people, trying to create the appearance that Luc Maria is alive. Also, having tracked all the movements of the smartphone that day, it was clear that it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. But the lawyers tried to turn this evidence in favor of their client, saying that he found his wife's phone and drove around the city with it in search of her. But no one could explain why Jorge was sending messages from it, as well as calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of the defendant's guilt was the bruises and scratches on his body found on the day of his arrest. These marks were recorded by experts on photos and indicated that the victim had clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck, but only to find particles of Jorge's epithelium under the fingernails of the murdered could not be found because they were destroyed by fire. But despite the large number of controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for the perpetrator. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic of coronavirus, but in October 2022, the defendant was finally found guilty of the brutal murder of his wife. The man was sentenced to 50 years in prison, although he himself did not admit his guilt. Custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted that now the main meaning of their lives is their granddaughter. Why did a friend eliminate an entire family? Have you ever pondered how well you truly know your friends, colleagues, or neighbors,
and how much you can trust these individuals? Typically, friends know everything about us, but occasionally, people who only pretend to be our friends and gain our trust might later exploit our vulnerabilities if they wish to betray or harm us. For most people, friendship is one of those elements that bring meaning to life, thus supporting and assisting a friend is paramount. But sometimes the intent to help can turn into a tragedy. The tragic loss of a young woman named Christy Shawn and her husband Joseph Codd in 2015 shocked the quiet provincial town of Leicester, North Carolina. This incident was among the loudest and most brutal crimes in the history of this small community. At the time of the tragedy, the couple was joyously anticipating the addition of a new family member. However, the most horrifying aspect was that their perpetrator was someone they knew well, trusted, and considered a friend. Furthermore, they were not his only victims. Early life of Christy Shawn. Christy Maria Shawn Codd was born on September 3, 1976, in Madrid, Spain, and was the only child of American military personnel. Her father was a U.S. Air Force soldier, and due to his duties, he frequently moved from place to place with his wife and daughter following. The family did not stay long in Spain, and over the next few years they lived in various European countries before returning to the United States. The girl began her schooling in New Orleans, Louisiana, but within a year, the family moved to Texas, then to Illinois, and after that, Shawn spent several years in Latin American countries. Such a nomadic lifestyle had its benefits, as Christy spoke multiple languages from an early age and had the opportunity to experience the cultures and traditions of other countries. However, during her teenage years, she faced challenges in settling into new groups and making friends in new places. Just as she would start to settle in, it was time to pack up, move, and change schools and social circles. Yet, it was precisely because of the constant changes that she developed excellent communication skills. Christy easily found common ground with various people and was known as a sweet, sociable, and charming young woman. Additionally, from an early age, she actively participated in sports, including gymnastics and swimming, and for some time, she took kickboxing classes. When Christy finished school, her father retired from the military, and the family settled in Biloxi, Mississippi. There, she finally made real friends and discovered a new hobby: cooking. The teenager enjoyed preparing various dishes, experimented a lot in the kitchen, and her culinary masterpieces indeed deserved attention and praise. Eventually, she decided to pursue further development in this area and completed culinary courses. Her parents thought she would become a professional chef, but unexpectedly, she also discovered her talent for acting. Actress and culinary TV star. A beautiful and ambitious young woman brimming with talent, enrolled in an acting academy and moved to Los Angeles. There, broad prospects opened before her, and she intelligently seized every opportunity to make her mark. Christy appeared in commercials, performed on the theater stage, and also took part in some high-profile Hollywood productions as an extra or stunt performer. Specifically, she had a minor role in the Terminator franchise, performing quite risky stunts. In 2000, the young woman graduated from the academy, but by that time, she had not landed any significant or notable roles, despite her striking appearance and evident talent.
She then decided to focus on her culinary skills and also on sports, turning these two passions into a quite profitable business. Christy participated in several popular culinary TV shows which made her well known, turning her into a popular and recognizable figure. She made it to the finals of one season of The Next Food Network Star. But unfortunately, the blonde did not win, as the judges had mixed reviews of her culinary experiments. However, Shawn was not greatly dismayed, as she managed to attract considerable attention to herself. Thousands of people followed her on social media, keeping up with her life and creations. She actively promoted a healthy lifestyle, gave advice on proper nutrition, and even developed her own exercise routines to maintain good physical condition. About a year later, Christie founded and began successfully developing her own catering company, which provided banquet services for various events and also retailed prepared culinary products. Her business was distinctive in that it focused on proper and healthy eating. And additionally, the menu featured her own original recipes, which she created and perfected. Soon, the young woman contemplated starting her own farm, which would grow healthy and environmentally friendly produce. This would help her expand her business in the catering industry. At the same time, she conducted online courses on proper nutrition and developed several other projects. Fateful encounter on TV. In 2012, Christie met Joseph Timothy Codd, better known as JT, who worked as a casting director in television, responsible for selecting participants and actors for various high-rated projects. They first met at a studio in Los Angeles at the casting for a culinary show that the young woman wanted to participate in, and they instantly clicked. Joseph was nearly 7 years older than Christie, had been married before but was in the process of divorcing at the time they met. He was utterly charmed by the beauty and charisma of this delightful blonde, and he began to court her. The young woman was not averse to his attentions, and soon they began a romantic relationship. Joseph shared and supported the ideas of his beloved, and together they began to work on the project of their own farm. Soon after, the couple decided to leave Los Angeles and moved from sunny California to North Carolina. They sold Christie's quite successful and well-established catering business. Joseph sold his house in Hollywood, and they invested all the proceeds in buying a large piece of land in the town of Leicester. The couple acquired a spacious and cozy house, as well as a nearly 1-acre plot of land to realize their dream. The man continued to collaborate with TV channels, but now worked remotely, while the woman actively worked on developing her personal blog about proper nutrition and a healthy lifestyle. They were an ideal couple, with their relationship marked by love and harmony. Soon, the lovebirds decided to formalize their relationship, and in August 2014, they had a lavish wedding attended by several hundred guests, including relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even some fans of the famous couple. They were truly happy and full of plans for their future together. 3 months after the wedding, the newlyweds learned that they were going to become parents for the first time. Their joy knew no bounds. After the new year, during a routine ultrasound examination, the doctor told the couple that they were expecting a daughter, and a few days later, during a phone call with her mother, Christie mentioned that they had decided to name their firstborn Skylar. Everything was going perfectly, and the pregnancy was progressing smoothly, but the couple's happiness was tragically short-lived.
The mysterious disappearance of the Codds, Christie was 5 months pregnant and actively preparing for the arrival of their baby. She almost daily called her parents, who lived in another state, sharing updates on her well-being and chatting with her mother, sometimes for an hour at a time. However, on March 13, 2015, Christie's mother was unable to reach her daughter, but initially did not think much of it. The situation repeated the next day. Calls went through, but no one answered. Her son-in-law's phone also went unanswered. When by March 15th, both spouses' phones were turned off, Christie's mother became alarmed. Since Christie and Joseph's parents lived in other states, they couldn't quickly check on their children's home to ensure everything was all right. Therefore, Christie's mother called a close friend of her daughter, a woman named Cecily, who lived nearby and could check on them at their home. When a friend arrived at the Codd residence, she saw that both spouses' personal cars were parked at the house. However, the front door was locked, and no one responded to knocks and shouts. The couple's phones had been off for 3 days, which was also highly suspicious. Through a window, Cecily saw that the couple's beloved dogs, who they cherished and would never willingly leave alone, were locked inside one of the rooms. The woman decided to walk around the house and noticed that the back door lock had been forcefully broken, indicating that someone had attempted to enter, or had indeed entered, the home. She immediately informed Christie's mother by phone, who then promptly called the police. The responding officers confirmed that the back door had been broken into and discovered disarray inside, indicating that someone had been searching for something. According to the family, some valuables had been stolen, including a jewelry box belonging to the homeowner, and a safe in the couple's bedroom had been breached. However, there were no signs of blood, struggle, or evidence that the couple had been detained or taken by force. Additionally, the perpetrator had acted very cautiously, leaving no fingerprints or DNA traces. The relatives clung to the faint hope that 45-year-old Joseph and his 38-year-old pregnant wife Christy were still alive, but the experienced officers were not optimistic in their forecasts. Suspicious neighbor. In the initial days, the investigation simply stalled. No clues or even somewhat significant evidence could be found. The missing couple had no enemies or ill-wishers, and reconstructing what had happened was challenging even in broad strokes. The spouses' phones were left at home, last used on March 12th. Only incoming calls were recorded the next day, after which the devices died. The police decided to question the couple's neighbors to see if they had noticed anything strange or suspicious recently. An interesting detail emerged. A neighbor living across the street saw another local resident throwing a large bundle into a trash bin near the Codd's home on the morning of March 15th. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but when he learned of the couple's disappearance, he thought the information might be useful to the investigation. Checking the contents of the bins was no longer possible, as the trash had been taken to the dump just the day before, and now any potential evidence would need to be searched for there. But first, the police wanted to speak with the person who had discarded the strange bundle. He turned out to be a 36-year-old Robert Jason Owens, who lived on the same street, was well acquainted with the couple, and even considered a close family friend. Robert was a handyman and had helped Christy and Joseph when they first moved into their new home. They became friends, and later the couple invited their new friend and neighbor to their own wedding. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious about this, except that other locals described Owens as a strange and unpredictable person. Horrific discovery and shocking confessions. On March 16th, Robert was summoned to the police station for questioning, initially denying any involvement in the couple's disappearance and claiming ignorance about the bundle mentioned. There wasn't much to charge him with initially, beyond the unsubstantiated claims of another neighbor. However, that evening, the situation dramatically changed after the very same large, strange bundle was found at the landfill. Inside were items from the missing couple's home, including Robert's clear fingerprints and DNA traces found on partially burnt clothing belonging to the couple, a blanket and a throw from their home, all stained with blood. This evidence confirmed police suspicions that Christy and Joseph were no longer alive. Doubts were dispelled when police searched the suspect's home and found charred human skeletal remains in his wood stove. Robert was then brought in as a suspect in the brutal elimination of his neighbor and the neighbor's pregnant wife. Despite his denials and inconsistent statements, he eventually confessed after several hours, and his admissions were truly shocking. He admitted to the double fatal incident but claimed it was accidental. According to him, on the evening of March 12th, he decided to visit his friend's home but swerved off the road to avoid hitting a dog, getting stuck in the mud. He walked to the Codd's home and asked for help to push his car out. The helpful and responsive couple agreed to assist, and while they were pushing the car, Robert, sitting at the wheel, accidentally confused the gas and brake pedals, striking and running over the couple. Terrified, he believed he would be accused of taking their lives, so he chose not to call the police or emergency services, instead deciding to cover up the incident. Robert claimed he returned to the Codd's house, broke into the back door, and took blankets from the bedroom to move the bodies, which he wasn't sure were deceased. He wrapped the bodies, placed them in the bed of his pickup, and drove them to his home, where he dismembered them in his own bathroom using a saw and a small axe. He then fired up his stove and began incrementally throwing pieces of his friends' bodies into the fire, hoping they would burn completely. The blood-soaked clothing, blankets, and footwear of the deceased he oddly chose not to burn, but instead packed into a trash bag and disposed of in a dumpster, assuming that once the trash was taken to the landfill, no one would be able to find anything. After all this, Robert claimed he decided to stage a burglary, though in reality, he had robbed his friend's home himself, stealing money and valuables, which he pawned the next day. Unsolved crime. The cruelty with which Robert disposed of his friends' bodies and the eerie calmness with which he recounted the events shocked even seasoned police officers. In his home, they found a saw and an axe stained with blood, skin, and bone fragments of the deceased. The accused hadn't even bothered to clean the tools or attempt to hide them, confident that the investigation would never lead to him since he had left no traces at the Codd's house. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bone fragments found in Owens's stove belonged to the missing couple. Law enforcement decided to delve deeper into the suspect's background. Robert was unmarried, had no children, and barely maintained any contact with his relatives. He had previously lived in Asheville, North Carolina, but in 2000, he bought land in Leicester and later built a house there. It turned out that his name was linked to an unresolved crime from 15 years prior that occurred in Asheville. In 2000, Robert's close friend Zeb Wing Quinn, who was only 18 at the time, mysteriously disappeared. Robert and Zeb had known each other since school, lived nearby, and were friends. Zeb was undergoing military training and also worked part-time at Walmart. On January 2nd, 2000, after finishing his shift, Quinn met with Robert, planning to drive to Leicester to buy a new car, but he never returned home. A few days later, his Mazda Protégé was found in another part of town, parked with its headlights on. Inside, a heart was drawn on the window with red lipstick. The car's owner was never found. The car also had damage and scratches with traces of paint from another vehicle. The last person to see Zeb was Robert, whose car also had damage, and it turned out that the scratches contained paint particles from Zeb's car. Robert told a peculiar and implausible story. Shortly after they headed towards Leicester, Zeb blinked at him to stop. Zeb said he received a message on his pager and urgently needed to use a payphone. He asked Robert to wait and drove off to the nearest gas station, but returned 10 minutes later, looking frantic. Said their plans had changed, and then drove off in an unknown direction, hitting his friend's car in the process. It was also discovered that Zeb had a romantic relationship with a woman named Misty Taylor, whose former boyfriend, Wesley Smith, had threatened Zeb with harm if he didn't stop seeing Misty. Taylor, Smith, and Owens were questioned in this case, but due to a lack of evidence, all three were released. Additionally, Misty and Wesley had alibis, which was not the case for Robert. A significant amount of money, which Zeb had with him in case he decided to buy the car, and his pager disappeared from his car, and it was never determined what message he had received, if any. The investigation leaned towards the theory that there was no message at all. Another oddity was that the day after Zeb's disappearance, a man called Walmart claiming to be him, stating he wouldn't be coming to work for the next few days due to illness. However, the colleague who answered the call thought the voice sounded strange and unfamiliar, not like Zeb at all. That phone call was traced to a Volvo plant where Robert worked. During questioning, Owens unexpectedly claimed that he made the call at his friend's request the night before Zeb sped away. No new evidence or witnesses were found, and the case remained unsolved, with Zeb Quinn listed as missing ever since. However, 15 years after these events, Owens was interrogated again, suspected of being directly involved in his longtime friend's disappearance. New, unexpected details of an old case. In June 2015, the case of Zeb Quinn was reopened from the archives, and the investigation resumed. However, at first, it seemed unlikely that law enforcement would uncover any new information. Robert recounted the same story he had told back in 2000, indicating he had nothing new to add. Nevertheless, the police decided to conduct a more thorough search of his property, where they stumbled upon something very peculiar. In a detached concrete slab at Owens's home, a strangely walled-off cavity was discovered, inside which were small, heavily charred human bone fragments. Unfortunately, the remains were too damaged to undergo DNA analysis, so it was impossible to definitively determine if they belonged to the missing Quinn. A neighbor's interview provided even more unexpected results. An elderly man living nearby remembered something from January 2000, when young Owens had just purchased the land and was starting to build his house. One evening, he started a fire that emitted a sickly, sweet, nauseating smell. The neighbor even confronted him because the wind was blowing the stench in his direction, nearly making him sick. Soon after, the fire pit was covered with concrete, which seemed highly unusual, but Robert claimed he planned to build a small fountain there, which he never did. The neighbor had forgotten about the foul-smelling fire until 15 years later when police showed up at the property. Ultimately, Owens confessed to being complicit in a crime, telling an entirely new story. According to him, Zeb was killed by his own uncle, Walter Owens, who had been hired by Wesley Smith to eliminate Misty's new boyfriend, whom he still loved. Robert claimed he was unaware at the time, and his uncle had asked him to lure the young man to a secluded spot. When the three of them ended up in a wooded area on the road to Leicester, the uncle ordered them to stop the car and then to signal Quinn to do the same. Once the young man stepped out, Walter shot him silently and then instructed his nephew to help dismember and package the body, which was burned on Robert's property that same night and encased in concrete. Interrogating Walter Owens was no longer possible, as he had died several years before his nephew's horrific confession. No evidence was found at the supposed crime scene, and the story sounded very unconvincing. Legal proceedings, plea agreement, and final verdict. Initially, Robert faced charges of first-degree double murder, murder of an unborn child, dismemberment and concealment of evidence, burglary, and robbery. All these charges could have led to the death penalty, but it was revealed that the defendant had long suffered from depression and mental disorders, taking powerful medication, which his lawyer used as a foundation for defense. Thanks to a well-constructed defense strategy, the accused could have been found insane and sent to a psychiatric clinic instead of prison, which neither the prosecution nor the victim's relatives found satisfactory. At the same time, the investigation into Quinn's case began, from which the criminal might also escape unpunished. In 2017, the defendant agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt in the murder of the Codds in exchange for a guaranteed removal of the death penalty from potential sentences. For this case, he was found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, dismemberment and incineration of bodies, burglary, and robbery. In total, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. In 2022, Owens made another plea deal with the authorities, this time regarding Quinn's case. However, he only admitted to complicity in murder and assisting in hiding the evidence. For this crime, he received an additional 12 years, added to his already effectively life sentence. After the sentencing, the murderer addressed the court, asking forgiveness from the relatives of the people he had killed. He again spoke of his innocence, attributing everything to an unfortunate accident and citing his mental disorder and the influence of strong medication, which impaired his judgment. However, the relatives of Christy and Joseph Codd, as well as Quinn's family, did not believe him. They have never reconciled with the term unintentional murder and believed that in both cases, the man acted deliberately and for selfish motives.
The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, the man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. So they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life So, at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect. The anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people, ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Anderell, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target, but his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salas, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salas immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a .380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal, and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car, though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salas? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salas, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salas and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salas was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrell, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic, they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andarill. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all three men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of two men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Shipolina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, this turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Shipolina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, he was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salas, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salas, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Daniel Anderl's Law. After the attack, Mike Anderl spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salas, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members.
Today's story began on a Saturday evening in July 2011 during a dance lesson when Joseph Saunier, a respected and wealthy pathologist, first met Richelle Tina, a single man, famous in his city and beyond, enjoying freedom, status, and money, and a beautiful, sweet woman, almost 10 years younger than Joseph, successful in living a life of pleasure. Meeting on the dance floor was the beginning of their story, which unfortunately ended in tragedy. At that moment, when the ideal partnership in the dance grew into a tender and passionate romance, no one could not even imagine what events would follow after a while. The biography of Joseph Saunier, before meeting Richelle, is a path full of joys and tragedies. Born in 1955 in a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana, Joseph from childhood dreamed of continuing the work of the family and become a doctor. With outstanding abilities, the young man earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science cum laude from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. The young man perfectly combined his university studies and work. Wanting to achieve professionalism in his chosen activity, he constantly took additional workload at the university and honed his knowledge and practice at the hospital. The management noticed the success and zeal of the young employee, and in the last year of training he received the position of chief resident. Upon completion of his studies, Joseph chose the field of pathologic anatomy, later becoming a respected pathologist and laboratory director in Lubbock, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by the tragic loss of the woman he loved. His marriage, which lasted 27 years and which he considered happy, ended in divorce. His wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her choice and agreed to divorce, believing that the man he loved had found his happiness. Dr. Saunier had a strong character and a great sense of nobility and responsibility. After the divorce, he maintained a very warm relationship with Becky and continued to support his two sons, showing resilience and strength of character. When Becky died 2 years later at the hands of her new husband Joseph, shocked by the heinous death of his former spouse, once again experienced a wave of grief and loss. He repeatedly recalled the family years gone by and mourned the loss. However, the doctor remained a pillar for the family. He immediately took over all the organizational issues and funeral expenses and helped his sons to survive the trauma. The children later admitted that it was his support that helped each of them overcome the pain. The tragedy left a deep mark on Joseph's heart. For a while, he fully devoted himself to work and the upbringing of two sons. Later, the grief he experienced led to a reassessment of life. The man decided to start a new personal chapter in a new city and with a new woman. In 2007, Dr. Saunier moved with his sons from Dallas to Lubbock, Texas, where he accepted a position as chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for something new to refresh him and fill the void inside, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes, also because it was a place where he met different women. A couple of times he even tried unsuccessfully to build relationships with his dance partners. And then, one warm summer evening, Rochelle Tima appeared at the dance class. Elegant, graceful, refined woman with a sense of humor and lively eyes attracted Dr. Saunier's attention at first sight. Her smile lit up the room, and Joseph realized she was exactly who he was looking for. Rochelle, for her part, also noticed the confident and respectful man moving deftly on the dance floor. Rochelle, 47, and Joseph, 57, paired up, complementing each other perfectly in the dance. With each new session, they realized they were growing closer. Dr. Saunier suggested dating, and Rochelle agreed. Thus began a new, as it seemed at the time, happy chapter in the lives of both of them. Rochelle had an attractive and innate charm that had such a strong influence on men that they were willing to change their lives, destroy marriages, and commit criminal acts for her. Rochelle was one of those women who have a unique magnetism, attract attention, and cause passion. Such are called fatal women. Joseph and Rochelle's paths would not cross until a July evening because she had previously lived in Amarillo, a couple hours by car from Lubbock. In fact, they were both starting a new life with a clean slate after personal love dramas. Leaving Amarillo, Dr. Saunier's new lover was running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic in plastic surgery and cosmetology. The woman met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. Initially, there was a purely friendly communication, then a slight flirtation, after a spark between them, and began a romance. Rochelle was a free, accomplished woman. For a long time, she worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and did not need anything. 4 children are grown. She owed no one anything. Unlike Mike, who was bound by the bonds of marriage, a plastic surgeon began leading a double life. A few months later, his wife found out about the affair and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike was so infatuated with Rochelle that he almost did not notice how a huge stage of his life ended. He decisively separated from his wife. For Rochelle, who had never claimed to be married to Mike, an exciting affair from which she wanted only joy and ease turned into a union that required her to be just as maniacally obsessed with her partner. Not getting the attention he expected, Mike tried to pressure Rochelle, which only served to scare her away. Seeing the manipulation and the desire to completely control her life, the young woman decided to part with the plastic surgeon, and in 2010, the paths of former lovers parted. Nevertheless, even after the breakup, Mike for a long time pursued Rochelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeded all healthy boundaries, forcing Rochelle to decide to move to disappear from his sight and free herself from his oppressive influence. That's how Rochelle found herself in Labico, intent on starting a new life. Dr. Saunier and the beautiful, cheerful partner quickly hit it off. Gradually, their relationship grew into true love. Sons and relatives willingly accepted the new lover and were happy for Joseph. The man spared nothing for her, showered her with gifts, invited to the best restaurants and private clubs in the city, took her on trips. After Joseph realized that he finally found a worthy woman with whom he was ready to tie his life, he took her to Los Angeles and, in the presence of his entire family, made a proposal. At that moment, Rochelle was 47 years old, and she was literally crazy about her new man. Her personal page and social networks was filled almost daily with love confessions to Joseph. Of course, Mike Dixon couldn't help but see these confessions. The former lover was emotionally shocked to learn that Rochelle not only meets with a new man, but also openly confesses his love and is going to marry him. He realized that it would not be possible to get his former friend back, but he dared to offer her to resume the former format of meetings and become at least lovers. The idea to form a love triangle did not find a response. Rochelle firmly rejected the proposal and told Joseph about everything. After a while, the couple began to feel that they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something resembling a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not fully realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation spiraled out of control on July 11, 2012. A landscaper who had arrived at the doctor's home to discuss an upcoming remodel contacted emergency services. Upon arriving at the customer's home, he attempted to contact the owner, but received no response. The man noticed an open door and, assuming Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. He saw the house in disarray, and most disturbing was the presence of a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The designer cautiously walked further inside in search of the homeowner and then examined the garage, where he found Joseph Saunier lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. The doctor's body bore evidence of stab and gunshot wounds. Concluding that the perpetrator might be somewhere nearby, the designer immediately left the house and summoned help by telephone. At 2:48 in the afternoon, the police department received a call, and several patrol cars were immediately dispatched to the scene. Arriving officers found the victim of the crime, identified as Joseph Saunier, a 57-year-old pathologist. Medics confirmed the death of his colleague. The incident shocked the public as it occurred in one of the city's most peaceful, safe, and upscale neighborhoods with virtually zero crime. Dr. Saunier, a member of a respected profession, was known for his calmness and kindness and had no apparent enemies willing to harm him. Although a window had been broken, what had happened was not a robbery, for nothing was missing from the house. A bottle with the bottom shot through was found at the scene. It appeared to have been used as an improvised silencer for a firearm. A short time later, a forensic team arrived to collect evidence for examination. Apparently, the assailant was inexperienced as he left ample traces of the scene. DNA collected from the bottle used as a silencer, and blood samples found were sent to a lab for further testing. Neighbors interviewed by detectives claimed they did not see or hear anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered the house using a panoramic window overlooking the backyard, a circumstance that made his attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted his victim and began shooting. It was most likely at this point that the wine bottle was used as a silencer. Judging by the traces of blood left in the hallway, the doctor was still alive after the shots were fired. He went into the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed the victim a number of times. An autopsy on the body found 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances indicated that the murder was not a random crime. What remained unclear was who had done it and why. The investigation focused on the pathologist's close social circle. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancé recounted strange events in her and Joseph's life in the last months before the tragedy. According to her, it appeared that Dr. Saunier was being stalked. In addition, Rochelle herself had seen a stranger standing in front of Joseph's house watching the door and windows. She also described persistent calls and texts that began to be received by her fiancé just prior to his death. Officers verified the information, but believed the calls and messages came from other women with whom Joseph appeared to be in a parallel relationship, as there were witnesses who said the man was in contact with several women at once. Investigators asked Rochelle if she was aware of the other women. She answered that she was not. Joseph's sons denied the possibility that their father could have had mistresses, as cheating is not in the character of their father. However, investigators continued to develop a version of the crime motivated by jealousy. At the next interrogation, Rochelle could not withstand the pressure, cried, and admitted that she knew several women, probably involved in the crime. According to her, several former girlfriends were constantly stalking Joseph. He ignored them, but they never stopped expressing their displeasure about his future wedding. One of them turned out to be a lady from Florida who continued to persistently call and write even after Dr. Saunier revealed his serious relationship with Rochelle. Another was a nurse, a colleague of the pathologist, who also called and wrote to him regularly. The third was a woman with a daughter who, shortly before the murder, had sent a letter to Joseph, accusing him of abandoning her and her child. At the same interview, Rochelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. Until then, she hadn't connected the surveillance of her and Joseph to Mike, since Mike had completely stopped paying attention after her refusal to become a mistress. She assumed he had accepted her marriage and moved on with his life. The police had a viable suspect and they went to talk to the plastic surgeon. Mike willingly went to talk to the detectives. He admitted that he had indeed been deeply in love with Rochelle and had divorced his wife in the name of that love in an effort to create an opportunity for their future together. He admitted that the separation was a blow to him, and for some time he tried to get Rochelle back. She remained adamant, however, and he eventually relented and found a new woman, considerably younger than himself. His new girlfriend, a medical student, confirmed his alibi, as Mike was at work at the time of the crime and then spent time with her. The investigation ran into difficulties. All the suspects, including Rochelle herself, had incontrovertible alibis. Detectives tried to identify possible enemies of the murdered or people financially interested in his death, but no new figures were found. By the time the lab results came back, the situation appeared to be a dead end. The forensic results, unfortunately, did not add any clarity. The DNA sample from the bottle did not belong to the victim. However, the police database was unable to determine whose sample was found at the crime scene. And that's when law enforcement officials got unusually lucky. The police department received a call from Paul Reynolds, an aspiring EMT from Amarillo. According to him, he was sharing housing with a buddy named Dave Shepard, who had recently confessed to a murder committed in Lubbock, after which he attempted to take his own life, but was rescued. Paul relayed information that a neighbor had told him details of the crime, including specific details that only a small circle of detectives might have known, such as the use of a bottle muffler. The officers realized that Shepard was indeed involved in the crime. A witness who called claimed that Dave was only the perpetrator and that the person who ordered the crime was an unknown doctor associated with plastic surgery. Officers immediately began running a background check on the new suspect and found that Shepard had a violent criminal history with theft and hooliganism, but no major crimes. They determined that he was divorced, unemployed, and had been caught stealing on several occasions, including one where he stole $30,000 from a prominent businessman. Dave was taken to the station for questioning and pretty quickly he began to confess. confirming that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to Dave, the meeting with the plastic surgeon took place in a bar where both found themselves going through painful breakups with their partners. Under the influence of alcohol, the casual conversation turned into a true friendship. Mike Dixon told a sad love story, complained about Rochelle, who had left him and was now about to marry someone else. The man shared that he can't get over his former partner and is willing to do anything to get her back. Deciding that the only obstacle is Dr. Saunier, Mike and Dave devise a plan. However, their intentions, according to Dave, did not include murder. They simply wanted to slander the pathologist so that proud Rochelle would leave him and want to return to Mike. First of all, they found women who were paid handsome sums of money, $1,000 each, to play the role of mistresses and pursue Saunier. Then came a letter from a woman with a child claiming that Joseph had abandoned her. Dr. Saunier denied it each time, and Rochelle believed him. It also turned out that the camera flash the couple had seen was the light from Dave's cell phone flashlight, who regularly drove to their house and played up the surveillance. Each such trip was financed by Mike Dixon, handing out money for gas and related expenses. When spying and slander failed to separate the lovers, Mike set out to fix the problem in a radical way. He told his friend that he wanted him to kill the pathologist. As payment, Dixon offered 3 silver bars totaling about $10,000. Dave agreed. One of the bars given as a deposit, the hired killer immediately cashed in at a pawn shop. According to Dave Shepard, when he arrived at Dr. Saunier's house, things got out of control. It was an unintentional shooting. I got scared and he started walking away down the hallway. When I came to my senses from the shock, I shouted, "Dr. Saunier, are you all right?" Hearing nothing back, I followed him into the garage. He was lying there flat. I distinctly heard his last breath, and I bent down to check his pulse. There was no pulse. In his confession, Shepard claimed that he allegedly stabbed Joseph Saunier in an irrational and foolish attempt to cover up what he called involuntary manslaughter. "I stabbed him a couple times. I don't remember how many times. You say I stabbed 11 times. I had Dr. Saunier's phone in my hand, and I thought about dialing the emergency number to call for help, but I didn't. Maybe that's why 11 times. I put the phone back, mutilated the remains, then I went to Mike's, got the rest of the bullion, and tried to kill myself." According to Dave, agreeing to the crime, he did not understand what he was agreeing to, and when he found himself in front of Joseph, he realized that he could not kill. Had it not been for an accidental gunshot, Dr. Saunier would still be alive. The plastic surgeon was apprehended by police the same day on charges of first-degree murder based on Dave's testimony and an extensive body of other evidence, including compromising phone calls and text messages containing explicit confessions. At the first interview, detectives hoped to elicit a confession, but Mike Dixon stubbornly denied everything, demanding an attorney. A lawsuit ensued. Dave Shepard, as part of a deal with the prosecutor, immediately pleaded guilty to his role as a hired criminal and waived the right to appeal the sentence. As a result, instead of the death penalty, he received a life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon, against whom there was only circumstantial evidence, pleaded not guilty. Unexpectedly, Dave, who was a key witness for the prosecution, testified during the trial that he committed the crime on his own, without any involvement of Dixon in it. Under oath, he said that the silver bars were intended for investment in a business the two of them had intended to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial took place in 2016. Dixon was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. An appeal filed by his lawyers led to the reversal of the judgment. The man was released on bail in the amount of $2 million, but the fight for justice did not end. The prosecutor's office sought to have the sentence reinstated by the highest criminal court of the state. Otherwise, a third trial was to be held. The prosecutor's office's motion, filed on February 11, 2019, was granted. In April 2020, the bail was revoked, and an arrest warrant was again issued. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the lower court's decision and reinstated Mike Dixon's sentence. The judge ruled that the felon must continue to serve his life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon is currently incarcerated in a prison in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Joseph Saunier became part of the love triangle when he began dating Rochelle in July 2011. The woman still calls him the main love of her life and regrets that she unknowingly led a criminal to a noble, loving, and honest man. Today, we're going to visit Indianapolis. It is a blend of modernity and original origins, ancient traditions, and advanced technology. Indianapolis boasts art museums that showcase examples of cultural achievements from past centuries and modern times. Indianapolis hosts many festivals and events each year, with the Indy 500 automobile race being the most popular. But in our story, the tranquil Indianapolis that was to become for the Blackburn family a center of peace and God's home on earth became the site of a violent tragedy. On the morning of November 10, 2015, a car parked outside a home on Sunnyfield Court. Davy Blackburn had returned from his daily workout at the gym. He was about to get out of the car, but a phone call kept him in the vehicle for a few minutes. After finishing the call, he leisurely got out of the car and went into the house. When he opened the door, he froze, and the gym bag fell out of his hands. His wife was lying on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Davy was confused and badly shocked. He rushed to his beloved, gave her a cursory examination, felt for a pulse, and urgently dialed the emergency phone number. The young woman was alive. In the living room where the tragedy occurred was a complete mess. Things were scattered. The purse of the unfortunate was emptied. On the second floor of the house, a small child was crying. Emergency services arrived at the house after 8 minutes. The area was cordoned off. The house was filled with police officers and investigators. The victim was rushed to the hospital. She turned out to be 28-year-old Amanda Blackburn. But let's start in order not to miss any important details of this tragic story. Amanda Grace Byers was born on July 31st, 1987 in Muskegon, Michigan. She attended school in Indianapolis, Indiana, but the family moved to Elkhart in 1995. There, Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, and as early as 2008, she graduated from Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida with an associate's degree. Amanda grew up in a deeply religious family where Christianity and the power of God's Word were paramount. Amanda's father was the lead pastor of First Baptist Church in Elkhart, Indiana. The religious traditions of the church, sermons, and psalter the girl knew from childhood by heart and honored them unconditionally. When other children were in a hurry to grow up to know the taste of adult life, to go to parties and fall in love, Amanda loved Jesus and dreamed of serving him. But God already loved his Amanda. After all, he had created her in the likeness of an angel, a blonde-haired, slender girl with an open, kind smile and sincere intentions. But not only the girl's appearance was perfect, her thoughts and heart were also virgin. In every act of a man that was love for her neighbor. As a teenager, Amanda took a vow of chastity and agreed not to even kiss a man until she was married, and she was always true to her word. But the girl's heart beat harder when she met her true and only love. It turned out to be Davy Blackburn. He was a native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The guy studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University and was also from a Christian and believing family. Davy and Amanda met on a blind date at a Hawk Nelson Christian band concert organized by her sister and Davy's best friend. At that time, they were studying in different colleges, but every vacation the lovers spent together. It was pure platonic love, devoid of earthly lusts. They took walks together, shared their innermost thoughts and favorite excerpts from church books. They were never bored, for they knew how to rejoice in small things, and sincerely joked with each other. Once, before returning to school, Davy and Amanda had a mock milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. Davy then jokingly called Amanda a milk girl. Looking at her, he realized he had met the girl he wanted to marry. The couple dated long distance for a long time. They were constantly messaging each other on messengers, called each other and chatted for hours, every vacation they spent together. They were so reverent and tender about a serious relationship between a man and a woman that they visited a psychologist for a long time to learn how to communicate properly. On August 1st, 2008, the marriage ceremony of Amanda and Davy Blackburn took place. After the wedding, Davy told friends that from the moment he kissed Amanda, he knew that because of God's plan, there would be a special bond between them. For the first 4 years after the wedding, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina. Davy was an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble, but the young man wanted more, and he suggested to Amanda that she move to Indianapolis to organize a new church for youth. Davy worked as a youth pastor, production director, and assistant campus pastor. Amanda was reluctant to leave her family and part with her loved ones, and for a while struggled with the need to leave South Carolina. But she finally relented after her husband told her that God must have big things in store for them. In 2012, the Blackburns moved from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant an independent, high-profile church in the North Side. The religious organization started by the young family was geared toward young people, as is made clear in the weekly videos the couple posted on their website about relationship advice, conflict resolution, and what the Bible says about intimate relationships. In 2014, the family had their firstborn child, Weston Blackburn. The family was perfectly happy. They had a comfortable home on a quiet street, a favorite job in the church, which was regularly attended by a large number of young people. Their sermons were listened to and believed in. They lived in perfect harmony and understanding. But the day of November 10th, 2015, changed the family's life once and for all. Ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence in the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court around 8:30 a.m. The ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence. The pregnant young woman was rushed to the hospital where she was hooked up to a ventilator and underwent a series of resuscitative measures. But sadly, Amanda died the next day, along with her unborn baby. As it turned out, the family was expecting a baby girl who was named Evie Grace at her burial. Her death sparked a lot of sympathy and prayers on social media for an extended period of time as friends, family members, and strangers mourned Amanda with public posts. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared dead, Davy released an official statement saying that Amanda made it her life's calling to love and serve everyone she knew. She made it her life's mission to know Jesus as her personal savior to multitudes. Through her death and legacy, more people will come to a saving faith in Christ. I know without a shadow of a doubt that she wants me to continue what we started here in Indy. I firmly believe that God is still good, that He is taking our tragedy and turning it into triumph, and that the best is indeed yet to come. Dave wrote, "The murder of the pregnant woman was a blow not only to the entire Orthodox family, but also a shock to the entire state. People demanded that the perpetrator of Amanda and her unborn child be found and punished." In his first interview under oath, Davy Blackburn said he found his wife Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor. She was partially naked, with her underwear lying nearby, herself lying on the floor in a pool of blood face down. The pastor told investigators that he left the house around 6 a.m. to go to the fitness center to work out. When he left the door unlocked. "You always do that too, don't you? You leave and don't lock the door?" he told investigators. It's hard to say whether the criminals would have stopped if Davy had still used the key, but it's pretty obvious that they wouldn't have entered the house so easily, and Amanda had precious time to contact emergency services. But that didn't happen, and the attack left Amanda with 3 gunshot wounds, one of which was to the head. No arrests were made in the case. Just days after the crime, police quickly determined that her husband, Davy Blackburn, was not involved in the horrific incident. However, in the trial transcripts, Davy Blackburn's testimony is supplemented by the testimony of the first emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department, Scott Floyd, who arrived at the home after Davy's 911 call. He said Davy Blackburn was outside at the end of the driveway with bloody hands when they arrived at the house. Scott stated that Davy was very calm at the time. According to Scott, Davy did not understand what had happened to his wife, Amanda. He maintained that she was lying on the floor and he could not wake her up. Davy claimed that he came home from the gym at about 7:30 a.m. and continued his phone call with his friend Kenneth Wagner in the driveway, occasionally getting out, strolling down the driveway and peeking through the front door window to see if baby Weston was awake. He said he finished his call, entered his home at 8:10 a.m. and found Amanda lying face down on the floor. He thought she was sick or unconscious. He called emergency services at 8:22 a.m. It took him 12 minutes to make the call. In an emergency situation, 12 minutes is a long time. He repeatedly said he just thought something had gone wrong with the pregnancy, that maybe his wife had gotten dizzy and fell. Did he not notice after 12 minutes that there was brain matter about 5 feet away from her body? Emergency room Dr. Scott Floyd testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, leaving him to believe that the gunshot to her head had occurred about a couple hours earlier, but those transcripts were not made public. Davy was asked if he had called anyone else. He said that after he called 911, he called his father. Defense attorneys did not cross-examine Davy Blackburn. Authorities corroborated his story with surveillance footage from the gym, and he was not among the suspects. An autopsy conducted November 12th showed the woman suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had a gunshot wound to the lower left arm that went to her biceps, and a through gunshot wound that went in and out of her upper back. There were also multiple scratches on the left cheek, a split lip, and a knocked-out lower tooth. The above injuries indicated a possible struggle between Amanda and her attacker. A thorough investigation was launched. CCTV footage from nearby streets was examined, and neighbors and family acquaintances were interviewed. For example, a neighbor reported hearing gunshots about 35 minutes after Davy left the house. Another neighbor, Reginald Townsell, said their street was not the type of neighborhood where a shooting could occur, and that the Blackburns didn't deserve this. The neighbors were shocked, as everyone thought the Blackburn family were wonderful and truly loving people. Based on Amanda's injuries and the missing bank cards and MacBook bag, the initial theory was robbery. During the investigation, police determined that on the morning of November 10, 2015, several emergency calls were made reporting a home invasion at separate homes near Blackburn's home. Around 5:20 a.m., one woman reported waking up to find her cell phone, laptop, purse, and keys missing from her apartment. Her car was also gone from the parking lot. The sliding glass door to her apartment was open, she said. 3 hours later, another woman reported a burglary at a home on Sunnyfield Court. Someone broke through the patio screen and got inside. According to police, 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink women's sweater, a remote control, a bag of oranges and bedding were missing from the home. 5 minutes after that, someone else from Sunnyfield Court called the emergency services. It was Davy Blackburn. Lieutenant Richard Riedel of the Indianapolis Police Department said police are looking for a connection between the homicide and other burglaries that occurred in the same neighborhood in the morning. Police have not released details about the investigation, honoring the secrecy of the investigation, but after getting hold of images of possible suspects from one of the burglarized homes, they released them asking the public to identify and help the investigation. Davy Blackburn was confident that the police department was doing everything they could to catch his wife's perpetrator. Investigators assured that they had never seen such part of Blanche given to them to continue the investigation, so they were confident that very soon some of these promising leads would help find the person or persons responsible. The key clues used to track down the 3 suspects were a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. The receipt and sweater were found in the stolen Chrysler Sebring, which was used during the robberies. Authorities recovered the vehicle November 11th near the Blackburns' home. The debit card listed on the receipt matched the stolen card of Amanda Blackburn. Investigators obtained a warrant to examine the ATM camera and found video showing the driver covering his face with the stolen pink sweater. Police relied on DNA testing, surveillance footage, and witnesses to identify the suspects. DNA testing from the sweater confirmed that Jalen Watson was one of the suspects. Watson's identification was the first major breakthrough in the case. The affidavit said cell phone records were obtained because Watson's number was in the database because of his parole for another burglary. Diana Gordon's cell phone records were also obtained. These records showed that Watson's and Gordon's cell phones were in the area when the crime was committed. The phone records also indicated that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. Larry Taylor was the final piece of the puzzle. By examining surveillance footage in the area, police were able to identify Taylor's phone number and trace his address. In the days that followed, reports also surfaced that a gun had been found near the Blackburn home. Police said a man delivered the gun to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming to have found it outside the couple's home. The gun was analyzed by crime lab technicians. After 2 weeks of investigation and detective work, police charged 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old Jalen Watson with the murder of Amanda Blackburn. A third burglary suspect, 24-year-old Diana Gordon, was arrested for a parole violation, but was not charged with a felony because he did not enter the Blackburn home. After receiving crime lab results, a gun found near the victim's home was proven to be the weapon of the crime. All 3 assailants were apprehended.
When questioned, Larry Taylor said that he shot the woman twice somewhere because she jumped on him and he didn't want her to scratch him. Then, when she fell, he leaned over her body and shot her in the back of the head and bent over her watching her bleed to death. A criminal trio came to rob the Blackburn house. They just wanted some money. So they headed to the Blackburn home, where the husband had left the front door unlocked when he left for the gym. Inside, they confronted Amanda to keep her out of the way. Taylor hit her with a gun. Watson and Gordon saw the woman and wanted to leave. They already had the bank cards they had stolen earlier, so they went looking for an ATM. They tried unsuccessfully to get $500 from one ATM, but got $400 from another. This is where they got caught on CCTV. They then drove back to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor. In their absence, a struggle ensued in the house. Amanda came to her senses after being hit and lunged at the perpetrator, at which point he tackled the woman. Afterward, Taylor put the stolen debit cards in the car of accomplices who had gone to an ATM at the time of the crime, and when they returned, he admitted to shooting Amanda. According to court documents, the Blackburn home was the third target of the November 10th attack by Taylor, Watson, and Gordon. In the first break-in, the thieves stole a laptop, wallet, and car while the resident was asleep. While inside the home, they discovered they were being recorded by a video camera, but simply moved on. The group drove up to another home, broke in through a patio window and stole 4 televisions, a laptop, jewelry, a bag of oranges, and a pink sweater that eventually helped police identify them, the affidavit said. Court documents outlined the evidence police collected against the suspects. The most important piece of evidence: Watson's DNA was found on a pink sweater taken during the second burglary, which was then used to cover his face from a surveillance camera as he tried to withdraw cash using Amanda Blackburn's bank card. Watson and Gordon cooperated with the investigation in return for a reduced sentence. Larry Taylor waived his right to remain silent and admitted to being near the scene of the burglary. He said he may have stopped in the Blackburn neighborhood, but claimed he was so confused he couldn't remember. Formal charges were filed by the county prosecutor. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including the very same felony, after knowingly and willfully killing Amanda Blackburn. Jalen Watson is charged with a felony. Both he and Taylor face multiple charges of burglary, robbery, and theft. Diana Gordon, who was in custody due to a parole violation, also faces burglary charges. There was a 4th person who knew about the robberies, burglaries, and other crimes but did not participate in them. He was questioned and released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit worked with the gang unit and federal marshals to arrest Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height praised the cooperation that led to the arrest. The detectives worked tirelessly, all day long without sleep, to solve the murders in the city. with the assistance of Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served. Because the victim was pregnant, prosecutors said they would consider filing additional charges related to the fetus. Even though the woman's underwear was removed and her shirt was pulled up, they said there was no evidence to support the rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial took place in December 2021, but the trial was over in seconds when it was discovered that one of the jurors had shared information about the case with other jurors. The disclosure interrupted the trial. A mistrial was declared. The final trial was held in October 2022. Subsequent jury selection was more thorough. The county drew more than 100 people as possible jurors. Each had to fill out a 16-page questionnaire so attorneys could assess whether they could reach a fair verdict. Larry Joe Taylor was sentenced to 86 years in the Indiana State Correctional Institution for the murder of Amanda Blackburn and for additional charges related to a burglary from a home. Diana Gordon and Jalen Watson agreed to plea agreements and testified against Larry Taylor at trial. Both received sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Jalen Watson and Larry Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. A murder conviction in Indiana can send a person to prison for 45 to 60 years, and some are punishable by life in prison or the death penalty. Prosecutors filed a motion to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence, which means he could face an additional 20 years in prison because Amanda Blackburn was pregnant when he allegedly massacred her. Davy Blackburn, the church's pastor, said he is relieved that those responsible for killing his wife have been caught and will not be able to harm anyone else. Amanda Blackburn's death has resonated with thousands of people, including the state's chief executive. Her funeral at a Christian church was attended by more than 2,000 people. Among them was Governor Mike Pence. Resonant Church has set up a donation page to help pay for Amanda Blackburn's funeral and medical expenses. Davy Blackburn said he is hopeful for a judicial system that will certainly show wisdom to the people who have caused his family so much pain. Incredibly, he has repeatedly reported that he has decided to forgive Amanda's killers. "I was very relieved to learn of the arrest," he told reporters. "Although everything inside me wants to hate, be angry and despair, I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope." Amanda Blackburn's case has generated significant interest across the country, with coverage appearing in national and international media. Davy Blackburn changed his role from that of an unhappy husband to that of a popular blogger. He began to capitalize on his tragedy and record multiple podcasts and videos, which he called Nothing Wasted. He began appearing on TV stations and speaking out about his wife's death, repeating over and over the pain he had experienced and recounting the tragedy. But he didn't seem unhappy. Amanda's death made Davy not only famous, but rich. The fact that he received an insurance payout after his wife's death does suggest that he didn't accidentally forget to lock the door that day on November 10th, 2015. Didn't he? What do you guys think? On March 2nd, 2016, Davy Blackburn bought a new 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom home with a pool. He then sold the very house where Amanda was murdered. For an unhappy husband who lost his beloved, Davy was pretty happy. In July 2016, he posted a photo of his new home on his blog and captioned it, "How happy I am to have pool parties in my new home." Now Davy Blackburn is happy in his new marriage. Nothing is wasted serendipity. Turn your eyes to Jesus, gaze upon his marvelous countenance, and earthly things become strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. A young mother who never believed her husband would take her life. Manipulation is a type of social and psychological influence where one person seeks to change another person's perception and behavior for their own interests. Manipulators typically follow similar patterns, resorting to deception, blackmail, and moral or physical abuse. Often, their methods can be so intricate and cunning that the victim doesn't realize they are acting in the manipulator's interest. This frequently happens when the victim is in love with the manipulator and trusts only them. The case of Maria Casada was classified as femicide. a deliberate crime against a woman by a man. The most horrifying aspect of this crime was that it was entirely predictable, and those close to the girl considered the tragedy just a matter of time. Maria herself was afraid of her abusive husband, but loved him and wanted to keep the family together for the sake of their children, so she gave in to his manipulation. She blindly trusted her partner and did not sense danger when he invited her to a fateful meeting. Maria Fernanda Casada, childhood, family, and early years. A girl named Maria Fernanda Quesada was born on June 18, 1994, in the town of La Garita, located in the Guanacaste province in northern Costa Rica. She was the only child in the family, and her birth was a true miracle for the Quesada couple. Maria's mother had been treated for infertility for many years, and doctors had given up hope, claiming she would never have children. However, despite all the forecasts, she managed to conceive and gave birth to a healthy child. Her parents showered her with love and care, striving to protect her from all troubles and provide her with everything she needed. From a young age, Maria dreamed of having a large family with brothers and sisters, but her mother's health prevented her from having more children, so Maria remained an only child. The girl then decided that she would one day create a large, happy family of her own and have at least 3 children. The Quesadas worked hard and, by the standards of their native province, were considered well off. They aimed to give their only daughter the best education possible and fostered the development of her talents and abilities in every way. The family lived in a spacious, cozy home, and Maria had the opportunity to study music and attend art school. Maria had warm and trusting relationships with all family members, but she was especially close to her maternal aunt. Her mother's younger sister was only 6 years older than Maria, so they grew up as close friends, sharing secrets and being almost inseparable from a young age. Quesada excelled in school, had a creative nature, and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Those around her described her as a kind, bright, empathetic, and friendly person, always ready to lend a hand. She always had many friends, easily connected with people, and was very attractive. Single mother. At 18, Maria started dating a boy she had known since school. Their relationship developed quickly. The young man seemed reliable and loving to Maria, but everything fell apart when she told him she was pregnant. The young man, who was her age, was completely unprepared for family life and raising a child. He immediately suggested she terminate the pregnancy, and when she refused, he declared that their relationship was over. Maria was devastated, but still hoped that after the baby was born, the father would change his mind and come back. However, by then, her ex-boyfriend was already seeing someone else and wanted nothing to do with the son he had fathered. Maria's main support came from her parents and aunt, who helped and financially supported her and her son. The young mother knew she couldn't rely on her relatives forever and needed to provide for her son on her own. She began looking for ways to earn a living, wanting her work to bring her joy. Soon, she discovered online lessons on soap making and crafting decorative candles from wax. Being a creative person, Maria was drawn to this activity and saw great potential in it. Maria threw herself into making handmade candles and soap, selling her products online. She created social media groups to advertise her goods and took individual orders for custom candles and soap tailored to customers' specific preferences. Her business quickly gained momentum. Her social media following grew rapidly, and with it, so did her orders. She continuously improved her craft, aiming to become a top-notch artisan, and dreamed of saving enough money to open her own shop. Meanwhile, Maria also started teaching online soap-making classes, earning a decent income. She continued to live with her parents and son, saving for her own home, and dreamed of getting an education, a frightening suitor. Maria worked hard, but she never stopped dreaming of meeting a worthy man with whom she could build a strong, happy family, someone who would love her growing son as his own. Her loved ones shared this dream, but when she brought her new partner into their home, they were filled with anxiety and fear for her future. In the fall of 2017, Casada went to the city to buy supplies for making soap and candles. While she was shopping, a charming young man named Esteban Rivera Vargas approached her. He paid her a few compliments, saying he was captivated by her beauty and couldn't resist coming over to introduce himself. Esteban seemed polite and genuine, quickly charming Maria and earning her trust, so she agreed to take a walk with him and have coffee. After a brief conversation, Maria gave him her phone number, marking the beginning of their unexpected romance. Esteban was 12 years older than Maria, but she didn't see the significant age difference as an obstacle to their happy future. She fell in love with him from the day they met, though it was a mystery to those around her what had won her over. Vargas was the complete opposite of Maria. He was harsh, rude, constantly used foul language, and had many bad habits. But most importantly, he never spoke about his past. Officially, he didn't have a job, but he had substantial savings that many suspected were obtained through dishonest means. Esteban owned a firearm, which he kept in the glove compartment of his old pickup truck. He rarely parted with the pistol, but never explained why. Maria suspected that her lover might be connected to the criminal world, but she was too afraid to ask him directly. She also knew nothing about his past relationships. About 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided to introduce Esteban to her family. She was very nervous about her parents' reaction, and it turned out she had every reason to be. Esteban behaved provocatively, was rude, used foul language, and any questions or remarks provoked anger and sudden outbursts. He openly frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left their home, they began urging their daughter to break off the relationship, fearing for her safety. However, Maria was not just in love. She was truly blinded by her feelings and refused to listen to any arguments. She naively believed that her love, care, and support would help her lover manage his fits of rage, that he would eventually calm down, settle, and become a good husband to her and a caring father to her son, as well as to the children they would have together, which she longed for, a family like his. A couple of weeks after meeting Casada's parents, Esteban decided to introduce Maria to his family. He invited her to a family dinner at his mother's house, but the event turned into a nightmare for Maria. The Vargas family members were just as hot-tempered, aggressive, and arrogant as Esteban. They used foul language, communicated loudly, and any argument could instantly escalate into a fight. They treated their son's new love interest with disdain, making derogatory remarks, and even comparing her to his ex-girlfriends. They didn't like that Maria already had a child from a previous relationship, and they made no effort to hide their feelings. Maria held back tears of hurt and humiliation with all her might. To make matters worse, Esteban's relatives also had a fondness for strong drinks, and when intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and unpredictable. Maria found them cruel and malicious, a sentiment she candidly shared with her parents. Her father and mother once again tried to convince their daughter to break up with Esteban and stay away from him and his family. However, Maria remained adamant, believing that things would settle over time, especially since Esteban tried to behave himself when she was around. A hellish marriage. In December 2018, Maria told her partner that she was expecting his child. Esteban was not overly thrilled by the news, but he agreed that it was time for them to make their relationship official. The couple got married on April 6, 2019, when the bride was 4 months pregnant. They had a beautiful wedding with a white dress and a beachside ceremony. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved into a small house owned by Esteban. But from the very first days of their married life, he began to show his true colors. He no longer held back his outbursts of rage, threw tantrums over nothing, and didn't hesitate to use his fists. Insults, beatings, and humiliations became routine in their home, all witnessed by Maria's 5-year-old son. For several months, Maria not only endured all this, but also kept it secret from everyone. She avoided visiting her family so they wouldn't see the bruises on her face and body, wore long sleeves even in the heat, and carefully concealed the marks around her eyes with makeup to avoid attracting neighbors' attention. However, she grew increasingly fearful for the life of her unborn child and worried about how this situation would affect her older son. Maria believed that after the baby was born, Esteban would soften and fatherhood would do him good. She endured daily abuse, accusations, and humiliation, all while Esteban skillfully shifted the blame onto her, reminding her that he had accepted her with a child that no one else wanted. He expertly manipulated her emotions, knowing that the woman in love wouldn't leave, understanding how to frighten her and make her comply. Casada was terrified of being alone again, this time with 2 children, and this became Esteban's primary lever of control. However, shortly before the birth, after another brutal beating, Maria hastily packed her things, took her son, and fled to her parents. They were shocked by her appearance, as there wasn't a single unmarked spot on her body, and urged her to go to the police, but she flatly refused. Caring father. In the last few weeks before giving birth, Maria lived in her parents' home, still hoping that the birth of her child would improve the situation, so she was in no hurry to file for divorce. Her family was less optimistic and urged her to end the marriage as soon as possible, but she wouldn't listen. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a son, and she immediately informed her husband by phone. Esteban rushed to the hospital within 15 minutes, looking happy yet bewildered. He got on his knees, begging his wife for forgiveness, pleading with her to return to him, and promising that everything would change now. Maria believed him and went home with the children after being discharged. It's needless to say that Casada's parents were shocked by their daughter's decision. They understood that this was just a ploy and manipulation by their son-in-law, but Maria refused to listen. It all ended in a major argument, with Maria stating that if she had to choose, she would choose Esteban. Her parents didn't want to spoil their relationship with their only daughter or lose the chance to see their grandchildren, so they had to accept her decision. For the first few months, the new father did spend nearly all his time with his wife and newborn son. He surrounded them with care and even took on some household duties. However, he treated his stepson with a cool detachment. The stepfather didn't mistreat the boy, but it was evident that he was uncomfortable interacting with the child, although he tried not to show it. Moreover, Esteban officially got a job, and it seemed like he was doing everything for the well-being of his family. Maria couldn't be happier, as everything was now unfolding exactly as she had dreamed, but her happiness was fleeting and short-lived. Nonetheless, this brief respite even made Maria's relatives reassess their opinion of Esteban and believe that he had indeed changed for the better. Under one roof with a monster. The family idyll lasted precisely 1 year, but shortly after celebrating their son's first birthday, Esteban seemed to snap. All the anger, rage, and cruelty that he had been suppressing burst out, turning their home into a real torture chamber. He mercilessly beat his wife, broke several of her ribs, and nearly deprived her of an eye. In terror, Maria fled to her parents, who once again begged her to go to the police, but she refused. A few days later, Esteban came, apologized, and asked her to return home. To everyone's astonishment, Maria agreed, explaining that she still believed in her husband and hoped they could return to their previous happy life. Over the next few months, Maria repeatedly ended up in the hospital with serious injuries, but she always blamed everything on ridiculous household accidents to avoid involving the police. Neighbors regularly heard screams and shouting from the couple's house and even witnessed the man beating his wife. However, Maria always begged them not to call the authorities. People in the area were afraid of Esteban because they didn't know what to expect from him and feared he could attack at any moment. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation reached a breaking point, that Maria, fearing for her life and the safety of her sons, contacted the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a tyrant, manipulator, and outright sadist, so she moved back into her parents' home with her children. Moreover, she managed to obtain a restraining order against Esteban, prohibiting him from approaching her and the boys. Casada documented the injuries, and doctors recorded numerous bruises, contusions, and abrasions of varying stages of healing on her body, indicating systematic and brutal beatings. Her relatives, as well as neighbors, confirmed that Vargas regularly assaulted his wife and threatened her with harm. As a result, the court forbade him from approaching his wife and contacting their child without her consent. However, the restraining order didn't deter Esteban, who regularly showed up at Casada's house. He would wait for Maria to step outside and insist on talking, but she would always rush back inside to avoid him. Eventually, she only left the house accompanied by relatives, fearing an attack by her husband. A brutal attack and child abduction. Maria filed for divorce almost immediately, and now the couple faced a complicated process of dividing their assets and deciding custody of their son. She filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, supported by medical reports documenting her injuries and witness statements from neighbors and relatives. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of the child. It was clear that Esteban had his own plans, and on March 3, 2022, despite the court order, he came to the house of his still legally married wife's parents. He looked completely calm, behaved politely, and asked to speak with Maria. Her parents tried to turn him away, but he was persistent. A few minutes later, Maria herself appeared at the door and agreed to talk to him privately. It's unclear what exactly Esteban said to her, but he was very convincing, and Maria agreed to go with him to their shared home to settle some issues. Moreover, she took their son with her because Esteban convinced her that he missed the child and wanted to spend time with him. Her parents were adamantly against their daughter and grandson going anywhere with this dangerous man, but Maria assured them that nothing bad would happen. She took the child, got into Esteban's car, and that was the last time her parents saw their only daughter alive. The couple started arguing in the car. By the time they reached their house, Esteban was yelling and using foul language at Maria, as witnessed and overheard by the neighbors. The couple, along with their young son, entered the house, where the situation escalated. The shouting didn't stop, and soon it was accompanied by loud crashes, as if furniture was being broken and dishes were being smashed. Then came the sound of a child crying and Maria's desperate call for help. Neighbors called emergency services, and a man living across the street rushed over to help. As he approached, the front door flew open, and Esteban appeared on the threshold, covered in blood. In one hand, he held the crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His gaze was wild, and his face twisted in rage. The neighbor backed off, fearing for the boy's life, while Vargas jumped into the car and sped away at high speed. When the police arrived, they found the mutilated body of a young woman with no signs of life. Maria lay in the kitchen in a pool of her own blood, with multiple stab wounds. Blood splatters were everywhere, on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack on the victim. Forensic experts counted 11 stab wounds on the deceased's body, most of which were concentrated on the upper torso and hands, which she had used to shield her face. It seemed that Esteban had attacked her from behind, catching her by surprise. This was evident from the 3 wounds in the neck and shoulder area from behind. Maria likely tried to escape, but her husband caught up with her and continued to stab her in the chest, head, and hands. Her body was found lying on its back, with the final stab wounds inflicted near the heart. Search for the criminal and the abducted child. There was no doubt about who had dealt with the unfortunate woman, but where was the criminal, and where did he take the child? A few hours later, Esteban's abandoned car was found on the side of a deserted road. Inside were traces of blood, and on the floor lay the weapon used in the crime, bearing the man's fingerprints. For obvious reasons, the criminal decided to get rid of the car, which had been declared wanted. He could have hitchhiked, taken a bus, or stolen another car. However, the options of public transport and hitchhiking were quickly dismissed because the man was in bloody clothes, which would have undoubtedly raised questions or suspicions. Most likely, he stole a vehicle to escape. An emergency manhunt was launched, as the police had strong reasons to believe that the criminal would attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua with the child within hours. Alerts with photos of Esteban and his young son were sent to all border checkpoints, and by evening, the fugitive was apprehended. The criminal had even managed to find a clean shirt somewhere, but bloodstains from the victim remained on his jeans and sneakers. As expected, he tried to leave the country in a stolen vehicle with his young son in the car, but he was arrested at passport control. The man did not resist and immediately asked for a lawyer. A gun belonging to Esteban, with his fingerprints, was also found in the stolen vehicle. Crime investigation. The crime was initially classified as femicide, a crime against a woman due to her gender, which is considered a particularly serious offense in Latin American countries and is usually punished with life imprisonment. All the evidence pointed to Esteban: the bloody knife with his fingerprints, the blood stains on his clothes, and the neighbors' testimonies confirming that besides him, Maria, and the child, no one else was in the house. Moreover, the investigation revealed that the man had previously been charged multiple times for assaults and causing bodily harm. However, the only eyewitness to the crime was a 2.5-year-old boy. So, the criminal and his lawyers adopted a specific strategy. Esteban claimed that Maria had attacked him, and he was only defending himself from an enraged woman, panicking and grabbing the knife. The man argued that he didn't even remember how he inflicted the wounds and only realized what had happened when his wife fell silent. At the same time, the Vargas family tried to tarnish the deceased's reputation, calling her a bad mother, a terrible wife, a troublemaker, and unfaithful. The defendant's relatives claimed that Maria provoked Esteban, attacked him, and this ultimately led to the tragedy. They did everything to portray the criminal as a victim of circumstances. The lawyers insisted that the greedy Casada family intended to take all his property and deprive him of the chance to see his son. During the investigation, it was even necessary to exhume the body of the victim, who had been buried a week after the crime. Independent experts refuted Esteban's and his defense's claims that Maria had attacked him first, once again confirming that the first 3 blows were inflicted on her from behind. Trial and sentence. The trial of the criminal began only in March 2023, meaning the defendant and his lawyers had plenty of time to build a convincing defense. However, various activist organizations fighting for women's rights supported the Casada family, joined by crowds of people demanding just punishment for the criminal. The deceased's eldest son, who was 9 years old at the time, could testify in court and spoke about the stepfather's cruel treatment of his mother. The younger child, who witnessed the crime, was only 2.5 years old at the time. Psychologists worked with him and determined that the boy had a deep-seated fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. The child mentioned that his father had hurt his mother and that everything turned red. These materials were submitted to the court, but the child was not brought into the courtroom to avoid further trauma. Numerous witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances, testified against Esteban, recalling how he had shown aggression toward his wife at various times. Dozens of people had also regularly seen bruises and contusions on the young woman's body, and shortly before the start of the divorce proceedings, the police had documented signs of beatings. On May 15, 2023, Esteban Rivera Vargas was found guilty of the premeditated crime against his wife and sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison. Custody of the deceased woman's 2 children was granted to her relatives. Our story today is about a strong woman who broke down in an instant and made a life-changing decision that fundamentally changed the lives of her entire family. This story will remind everyone how important it is to take your mental health and the mental health of your loved ones seriously, and not to be afraid to speak up when things in life don't go the way you want them to. We will visit Atlanta, the capital and most populous city in the state of Georgia. It's a vibrant, busy tourist city that has grown thanks to giants like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. On November 6, 2021, at around 9 p.m., a man called emergency services to report that exhaustive screams and several gunshots were heard coming from a neighbor's house. Police officers rushed to the scene and entered the home. They found a man and a woman dead on the floor. After examining the scene of the tragedy,
The police began their investigation. The murdered spouses were Ronell and Kiana Burns. But who would want to kill a married couple, and why? The family lived in a large home that was located in the most ethnically diverse county in Gwinnett County. The house itself did not appear to have been burglarized, as all belongings were still in their places. But the clue to this double crime came to light very quickly. Let's rewind with you the history of the Burns family, like a movie backwards, and see the true cause of the tragedy that occurred. Kiana was born on September 15, 1977 in St. Louis, Missouri. She graduated from Riverview Gardens High School, later at St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she majored in cosmetology and soon began building her own business career. Kiana opened her own beauty salon, which was popular. The girl was very hardworking, as she always dreamed of a luxurious and rich life. She invested a lot of time in the business, and it paid off. Over the next 20 years, with her persistence and hard work, Kiana turned it into one of the largest beauty salons throughout the St. Louis area. However, the personal life of a young, bright woman did not always go smoothly. Strong, wealthy, and ambitious Kiana was very difficult to find a worthy couple. In her 44 years, she had 3 children from previous relationships, whom Kiana loved with all her soul. Her family described her as a great and loving mother. She knew how to support women, was a good friend, and a successful businesswoman. Kiana had it all when she met her future husband, Ronell Burns. Ronell Burns was born on May 14, 1975 in St. Louis, Missouri. Ronell graduated from the High School of Fashion in 1994. He played on the basketball team and played for a state championship. He was very driven, ambitious, especially loved the competitive spirit and always strived for greatness. When he met Kiana, he had 2 children of his own from a previous relationship. So fate brought 2 successful and ambitious people together, and they created a new, strong, and happy family. On September 13, 2012, they officially became husband and wife and celebrated a gorgeous wedding in the presence of numerous relatives and friends. However, soon after the wedding for Kiana began to open new sides of her chosen one. It turned out that at an early age, Ronell dedicated his life to Jesus Christ and wanted to start doing the work of the Lord. He began to serve everyone he could, even those he crossed paths with on the street. Ronell created his own webpage on the internet where he began coaching and preaching. Ronell voiced that in his early years, God spoke to him and told him to help people. One of the calls stated, "Sometimes he can call everyone, and only he can allow things to happen in life." Ronell continued his ministry. His video messages were very popular on the internet. In addition to his impressive lines as a church coach, Ronell was a financial counselor and insurance agent. He started a company called Traditional Financial Solutions, where he was determined to help people all over the world become financially independent. Ronell was very successful in his business and in his efforts to help, and his speeches did draw large audiences. Kiana supported her husband. Together they gained popularity online, as Ronell was already quite well known as a leader and coach in Six-Figure Ambition, an online program for entrepreneurs. He had over 7,000 followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, where he ran a channel with educational videos. Ronell and Kiana Burns brought their families and business minds together. They dreamed together and ended up creating something great that touched thousands of people. Kiana was known as a speaker at business events where she shared lessons and inspiration on how to succeed. She also had 14,000 followers on Instagram where she shared thoughts on her family life and inspirational quotes. In one of the popular video messages, the beautiful couple dressed exclusively in branded items appeared before their audience. They talked about entrepreneurship and how it has benefited their lives and the lives of thousands of subscribers. The couple spoke loudly that their mission is to convey to their audience how to become successful entrepreneurs, as well as build their fundamental business. The time to build other people's businesses was over. The Burns family wanted to teach young entrepreneurs not to spend all the money they earned,
but to invest it skillfully to generate new money that earned itself. The speech ended with the message that the Burnses believe in everyone who believes in them. And the belief is that you don't have to be great to start. You have to start to become great. They have never hidden their luxurious life, instead flaunting it in front of their audience, attracting new students and subscribers. However, in the Burns family, only Kiana has traveled the path that Ronelle has repeatedly described. She has worked hard to build and operate an entire network of salons on her own. At the time of their coaching, Kiana owned several salons and was also a successful insurance agent. It was Kiana's business that brought in most of the family's capital. Ronelle, in turn, diligently wanted to occupy a winning position, and therefore there was an image of a wealthy family exclusively in expensive clothes. Photos from the best restaurants were published daily. But rich and successful people go ahead, not wasting time on words, and poor people continued to believe the speeches of the Burns family. By tempting stories of how to earn big money without labor, using only the words of his mentor Ronelle, he received a lot of interest from the outside, because every poor person dreams of becoming rich. So Ronelle Burns founded a company with six-figure ambitions. It gave them the opportunity to continue to add to their capital and create their own legacy, which he talked about in every interview. The Burnses created a tight-knit family, and for a long time, their entire entourage thought so. Until Ronelle suggested that Kiana move from her beloved and native St. Louis to Atlanta. By that time, they already had 3 children together, Rhea, Makey, and Ray Haley. Parents to their children, and well-known in their careers, Ronelle and Kiana Burns were inspirational figures that people looked up to. The move to Atlanta was a forced move. They had plans to expand their business. Having owned his wife's business, Ronelle dreamed of expanding it. 3 beauty salons in St. Louis was no longer enough for him. The ambitious Ronelle wanted to establish a chain of salons in Atlanta, as well to expand his clientele. Kiana was reluctant to move out of St. Louis, but again gave in to her husband and continued to play along with him in front of the public. Kiana Burns painted a rosy picture of her life. On social media, she posted a picture of her receiving a premium Maserati Levant car as a gift from her husband. She also shared photos of her trunk full of Louis Vuitton bags. Each such post was captioned with words of admiration and gratitude to her husband. But, like any blogger, Kiana often dedicated her Instagram feed to her beloved children and family. After a while, the woman couldn't stand it and admitted to her audience that everything in their family is not as smooth as it looks. It turned out that the couple was on the verge of divorce. After moving to Atlanta, Kiana was left alone in a big, unfamiliar city where she had to start all over again. In a video message, she shared with her subscribers that it was hard for her to decide to move and adjust to a new home and new people. "You have to be ready for life changes," she said during her Facebook live stream. "Things in your life can change for the better or for the worse overnight. Literally. If you don't think you're a strong enough person, some things can take you out of yourself." She told her followers that she needed their support as she was going through a difficult time. Kiana admitted that her favorite subscribers are helping her get through the dark days, which had become quite a lot lately. From the outside, no one knew that they were so close to divorcing each other. This confession disturbed the subscribers, and Ronelle had to speak out live on air, too. He revealed that they decided 7 months ago that they were going to get a divorce. His words sounded like a business plan again. "I'm tired of her. We're going to continue to run our business together going forward, but we're also announcing that we're going to divorce. We've dealt with each other. We've both come to this conclusion, but let's not put pressure and grieve. Everything around us will remain the same." We took out a piece of paper on which we drew a line down the middle. That's how we decided how we're going to divide the business. But for obvious reasons, bloggers share only positive stories with their followers. To tell about failures and failures is to lose faith and, in the case of the Burns family, their status, which has been built up over the years. However, being public figures, it soon did become clear that the family's wealthy life was just a picture for social media. Ronelle, in his hunt for fame and popularity, very quickly squandered all the money Kiana received from beauty salons. But he did not stop there, and the debt of the Burns family to various banks in a few years reached more than $500,000. Obviously, the move to an unfamiliar city and financial difficulties reached their peak. On the eve of the tragedy, Kiana Burns went live and interacted with her subscribers. She went live where she asked her fans to pray for her strength as she struggles without the support and help of family and friends, especially as she cares for her children. In the post, Kiana talked about life changes and shared how she and her husband moved to Atlanta to expand their business just 5 or 6 months ago. She wrote, "I tell you that if you don't pray and keep the faith, things can change and take you away." She also spoke of the existence of a supportive love circle that will help you and talk to you about things that you just can't seem to get past. Because if we leave things to chance, we start to think to ourselves and make bad decisions. At the end of her speech, she added that any change in life is not always smooth sailing. Learning about new environments and new people, especially without the support of immediate family and friends, is sometimes very difficult. The woman also admitted that she is working with her mental health and worries that she is not strong enough to take on the challenges of fate. But was the move the main reason for the imbalance in the family? In that speech, Kiana was silent that the real cause of the rift was Ronell's numerous cheating and promiscuous life, which always remained behind the scenes of their happy life on Instagram. However, on the same night, she posted a video again where she was dancing merrily at home with one of her daughters. A few hours later, the unthinkable happened. Kiana and Ronell had a long argument. She then grabbed a gun and shot him, then herself. Authorities were first called to the Burns home. By the time police arrived, neighbors had gathered outside and said they heard gunshots coming from inside. Preliminary stages of the investigation determined that Ronell Burns had shot himself. But soon discovering Kiana's bloody body in the next room with a gun in her hands, it became apparent that the decision had come from a woman. The motive was clear, but some people claimed that Kiana was forced to kill her husband after she discovered he was cheating on her. Another version said that the couple was in terrible debt and that Ronell turned out to be a common con man who ended up cheating on her. People who believed this family dug hard into their lives in search of the truth. They discovered some very compromising information from Ronell's ex-wife. She claimed that during her divorce proceedings, she had learned that Ronell was a habitual chronic cheater. During that time period, he was extremely irresponsible with his wife's money and also failed to hold down any jobs, which ultimately led to ruin and a ruined credit history for his now ex-wife. Then he met Kiana. She was actually of great interest to Ronell, as she was a successful career woman. She in turn was attracted to Ronell's confidence and swagger. Kiana's fortune and Ronell's experience seemed to be a winning combination, but these expectations were not met, and all their business endeavors eventually collapsed. Only Kiana's beauty salon remained afloat, and from that moment on, despite the lack of income from Ronell, he actively continued to convince everyone what a successful businessman he was. The family successfully hid the real state of affairs and their severe lack of money on social media, continuously showing off expensive purchases. They also carefully hid the problems in their relationship behind happy photos together. On his account, Ronell continued to publish posts about his business endeavors, where he claimed that everything he takes on becomes successful and profitable. The Burns couple showed themselves to be devout Christians, and in each post, they added quotes from the Bible and other holy scriptures that fit the meaning of the speech. The couple also posted photos of their luxurious residence, showing the public their wealth and family in great detail. However, all these photos, which they showed in their home or at a party in front of cars or on vacation, in reality were only a cover and show. Ronell worked for an American marketing insurance company that extorted money from middle and lower income families. In fact, the man tried to involve even his family members and friends in this fraudulent scheme in order to raise his status, But Ronell did not get enough money from this activity in the firm and could not support himself. They kept convincing everyone around them that the new business was successful and they themselves were successful entrepreneurs. Their arrogance was so strong that they even made a TV series about themselves, calling it Meet the Burns. Everything they supposedly earned was immediately spent on a lavish lifestyle and a desire to feel like someone they really weren't. Such profligacy eventually led them to bankruptcy. So on December 19, 2019, Kiana and Ronell Burns filed an official bankruptcy petition. The couple had to liquidate some of their assets to pay off their creditors. While this was going on in their lives, Ronell and Kiana still continued to pretend like nothing was going on. They continued to portray themselves as a happy family and successful businessmen. But in St. Louis, it was getting harder and harder to do that. So Ronell decided that their family should move to a bigger city so that he could continue to scam more people with impunity. This became another stupid and failed decision on his part. They still had a thriving business that was the family's only source of income. Unfortunately, Kiana once again went along with her husband and agreed to the move. Kiana couldn't get used to Atlanta. She already knew that her husband had cheated on her repeatedly. The woman was tired of being patient and silent. Together, they made the decision to divorce. But in papers filed on October 10, 2021, Ronell listed his wife's infidelity as the reason for the divorce. Kiana was destroyed, but she understood the reasons as family and friends had no idea of the couple's difficulties. Ronell hid the truth from the public in hopes of preserving his image. On October 20th, 10 days after Ronell filed for divorce, Kiana went on live TV that day to talk about something much more serious. The bright smile she often displayed was now replaced by an expression of concern and sadness. After divorcing his first wife, conman Ronell Burns had remarried the successful and wealthy Kiana, and using his new image as a devout guru, he seemed a changed and reliable man. But in reality, he hadn't changed and continued to take advantage of his new wife's trust and money by playing the successful businessman. What seemed like a perfect union was over. On November 9, 2021, 44-year-old Kiana Burns shot and killed her husband, 46-year-old Ronell Burns, before pointing the gun at herself and committing suicide. The Sandy Springs Police Department said no one was home at the time of the murder, but the couple left behind 8 children who will now grow up without parents. Police said there was no history of domestic violence at the family's Atlanta home. Kiana Burns committed this a few weeks after asking her Facebook friends to pray for her. The reasons for this decision by Kiana Burns are unknown. One can only speculate what prompted the strong-spirited woman to make such a drastic decision. It is obvious that at that time she saw only such a way out while in a difficult condition. She withdrew into herself through unsolvable inner problems. She was tired of appearing to be happy instead of being happy. All their life together, they had portrayed that they were happy. However, everything in this family was a farce and a game. Absolutely everything. Kiana was tired of lying. It's hard to judge what a person does under a cloud of depression and other debilitating mental disorders, but it's also hard to understand why so many children are left alone in this world, essentially to fend for themselves. News of the influential couple's death has traveled throughout their vast network of friends and colleagues. The death of Ronell Burns and his wife Kiana has been widely publicized on social media. Numerous followers and friends shared words of regret describing the couple. People close to the couple paid tribute. One post written by a family friend shows that even people very close to the couple didn't know the real truth about the family until the end. Ronell Burns was someone who felt the need to flaunt his success and luxury, and these are usually the most insecure people. He got so caught up in his own self-belief that he mistook his sense of self-worth for a sense of self-importance. Imitating a stormy activity, he was able to ruin the life of more than one diligent and successful woman. Such people have no pride and no sense of dignity. He's just an ordinary con man who dragged his wives to the bottom. But where does a man like him get his pride? He deceived women, making them believe in beautiful fairy tales of happiness and success that awaits them only with him, because it is known that women love with their ears and dream of eternal love. And subscribers, will you say? Who tells subscribers the whole truth? They are strangers for whom they always create a beautiful picture. But do not forget that a beautiful picture, which is depicted on the front side of the paper, always has a backside, and what it will be decide only you.